Roll call.
Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Mr. Claxton?
Here.
Dr. Coker?
Here.
Mr. Cooley has a proxy, Mr. Reed?
Here.
Mr. Corley?
Here.
Mr. DeVilliers?
Here.
Dr. Goree? Dr. Gray? Mr. Javia?
Here.
Mr. Jenkins?
Here.
Dr. Jock Brown has a proxy, Dr. Bartholomew?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Dr. Joseph has a proxy, Dr. Henley? Here. Mr. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Martin?
Here.
Dr. Narcisse is excused. Dr. Ortling? Excused. Mr. Powell? Is excused. Ms. Tanner?
Here.
Ms. Trosclair? Here. Dr. Williams? And Mr. Williams is excused. You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Well, this is my first meeting, so please forgive me in advance. Excited to be here today. Thank you for everyone for coming today, this morning, for our Superintendent Advisory Committee meeting. We do have a few new faces today. We definitely want to recognize them and thank them for becoming a part of the Advisory Council. And so we want to recognize our new members today. They are as follows: Mr. David Claxton from Jackson Parish. Okay. Also, we have Mr. William Kennedy from Claiborne Parish. Okay. And also we have Mr. Jared Martin of Lafourche Parish. And Ms. Irma Trosclair from Lafayette Parish. And also Dr. Avis Williams from Albany Parish. She's not able to join us today at this time. We also like to recognize some of our guests and vested members that we have in the audience, Mr. Ronnie Morris, and also Ms. Doris Bojan. Thank you for being here. We definitely appreciate your time today and joining us today. So I have some cheat sheet today, so y'all got to work with me a little bit. So today, if you have any comments, so we definitely want you to pick up the comments card from Ms. Davis. Just a few reminders as you're speaking, all council members, if you need to speak into your microphone so the audience can hear you, and also we're streaming, so that's critically important that you speak into the microphone. At this time, the next agenda is to approve the minutes from May 23rd, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? And a second. Motion second from Mr. David Alexander and a second by Mr. Scott DeVilliers. Those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? New business. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding learning pods. Motion to receive. So moved. Are there any?
Or there was a Mr.
Mr. Corley, and a second by Mr. Javia. Are there any public comments?
Skip the report now.
Oh, I'm skipping the report, excuse me. All right, who's gonna?
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins.
Thank you.
Jenna Chasson, Department of Education. I also have Dr. Quintina Timmel next to me today, and we will help to facilitate some of the Louisiana Department of Education staff who will be here today to present to you all. Dr. Brumley is out of town today, and so we will be doing that in this place. So happy to be here with you all. And our first agenda item, thank you, Chairman Jenkins, is regarding learning pods. You all know that this has been a bit of a hot topic over the last 2 years in light of the pandemic. It has received attention from Bessie and also from the legislature, and so we have provided some updates in the past about this work on learning pods and also received some feedback from this council and from different stakeholders across the state. And so today we have Ethan Melanson, Executive Director of Governmental Affairs, here to present to us about the latest developments regarding learning pods.
Good morning, everyone. Ethan Melanson with the Louisiana Department of Education. So in 2021, Act 400 created learning pods for traditional systems and for charter schools. Learning pods are defined in the law as a group of at least 10 students enrolled in the school who receive instruction in a small group setting. We brought some policy before you a couple months ago, before the 2022 legislative session. At that time, you received the information and went to Bessie, but Bessie asked us to pause on the policies because there was another bill that was introduced into the legislature in 2022. That bill did not pass. So we are here to present this policy before you again and take any questions if you have any. Primarily what this is going to revise is Bulletin 741, which is the Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, and Bulletin 126 for charter schools. Primarily what we are doing is putting the law that was passed into policy. There's very little that we are adding to what the law stipulated. The only exception is for charter schools and a material amendment that's necessary under the law. So with that, I will take any questions if you have any.
Any questions or comments from the council? Questions or comments from the council?
Patrick, yeah, those pods, so you could have multiple grade levels in those pods, all right, understand that?
Yes, sir, you would be able to have multiple grade levels in those pods, and they're largely up to the discretion of the LEA of how you would want to structure them. If you would want them for certain purposes, such as career and technical education, if you want them for small group instruction, or in response to emergencies that may happen, similar to hurricanes, pandemics, to think that we had to add that to a list of emergencies, but, and those.
Are there any other questions or comments from the council? Hearing none.
So you have a motion and a second. Anyone opposed to receiving the report?
We have a motion and a second. Any opposition to receiving the report? Motion carries. Okay. Next item, consideration of revisions to bulletin regarding alternate assessment eligibility. A, Bulletin 111, the Louisiana School District and State Accountability System. Bulletin 118, statewide assessment standards and practices. Item C, Bulletin 1530, Louisiana IEP handbook for students with exceptionalities. Motion to receive.
Motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Pope and a second by Mr. Jones.
Staff members also, those policies are at your seat. So you see 111 behind the 126. And those are stapled together. So this is the actual. Yes. Right. Considering these separately. It's a handout passed out today.
Our next agenda item is about expanding and solidifying alternate assessment eligibility, and the Department of Education has worked really hard on this over the past year in order to develop alternate assessment eligibility, really just engaging a variety of stakeholders in this work to make sure that we get it just right. And the goal now is that we are taking this policy that you have before you to our August Bessie meeting. And so we developed a work group to meet the federal requirements for providing an alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities, specifically in grades kindergarten through second grade. So today we have Meredith Jordan, our Executive Director of Diverse Learners, here to walk through this process and how this alternate assessment eligibility criteria was determined.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Chasson. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here with you all this morning. I am Meredith Jordan, the Executive Director for Diverse Learners. I also just want to alert you all, there was an additional handout, I think, that was placed on the back table a little bit after some of you had already come in and grabbed your seats. So you should have a draft of these bulletins, as well as a copy of a draft tool that we'll kind of reference and talk about. So if you don't have those, Ashley's going to help us make sure that everyone has a copy of that draft tool that got out a little bit late on our table.
You need one for the record as you get a chance, actually.
And so, as Superintendent Chasson mentioned, we began this work over 6 months ago with a work group to make sure that we engaged all of the stakeholders and really thought about this from a process to policy type of mindset. So this first slide really kind of goes over and walks you through a visual history of alternate assessment and alternate standards in our state. And so just to kind of go through this overview visual and give you a snapshot and a little bit of history and bring us to where we're at, goes back to fall of 2009 when we first adopted the current grades 3 through 11 alternate assessment criteria. Now it has gone through some revisions, but that is when that 3 through 11 alternate assessment criteria was initially adopted. In spring of 2016, you see we adopted our Louisiana state standards. Winter of 2016, we adopted the Louisiana Connectors for our English learners, as well as our Louisiana Connector standards for students with disabilities. And of course, those standards are the basis for alternate assessments and those assessments that these significant students take. In spring of 2018, you'll see the English language proficiency test replaced the old ELTA assessment for English learners, and we had the LEAP Connect assessment replace that old Law 1 assessment. Coming a little bit more current, spring 2021, Act 438 of the 2021 legislative session requires literacy assessment of all students for K2. While those have not been decided upon just yet, we know that is also a potential area for K2 assessment. For spring 2022, we adopted alternate connectors for our English learners with significant disabilities. And then, bringing us up to really our purpose and need for this K2 alternate assessment criteria is this coming winter, we will administer our ELT Connect, so our English learner proficiency test for students with significant disabilities. Now, this is approximately 100 students in our state who are English learners who also have a significant disability. So for this year, that is our focus and our real purpose for needing this work group to begin over 6 months ago to start thinking through this K2 alternate assessment criteria space. So as you all know, there are some federal requirements and guidelines that we have to follow and signal also the purpose for this work. So you'll see on this particular slide, it goes through these really two main federal requirements. The first, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which requires that alternate assessments are provided for students with significant cognitive disabilities. So our English learners who also have significant cognitive disabilities coming this year will take that English learner assessment specific to their disability, the ELT Connect, starting this winter. And so we are required to provide an alternate assessment for any state standardized assessment that we give. So we have the English learner proficiency test for all English learners. Now we have an assessment specific for our ELT students who have significant disabilities. The second requirement here, these assessments must be administered to our students in grades K through 2 because this assessment will be a K-12 administration. And so we collaborated with stakeholders to provide this alternate assessment for ELT. We were part of a consortium that adopted and will begin to administer this test this winter. So let's talk a little bit more about our work group. So this particular slide shows you how our work group really began thinking about this work 6 months ago. And we recruited practitioners, folks who were ed diagnosticians, school psychologists, with those evaluative experiences and expertise to really take us from a process to a policy. So how will this operationalize in the field for IEP teams? One that is a process that will be user-friendly, that will help them make the right decisions for students. And now we're arriving here today, updating you all with what are the draft policy changes that need to take place in bulletins 111, 118, just to add that ELP Connect as an assessment, as an alternate assessment that we are going to be administering. And then really 1530, which is the meat of our change around what is this criteria. And so this work group kept several key considerations in mind that you'll see reflected in the policy. We did not want to, and the work group felt very strongly about not wanting to signal wide IQ testing for kindergarten through second graders. These are students who are in these developmental years, right? So we did not want to insinuate that we should go out and give IQ testing on a wide scale for students in grades K through 2. We also want, even our students, we want all students to participate in these screeners. So we get accurate information, we understand baseline information, and what are the needs and strengths of our students with disabilities, even those with significant disabilities. So the work group kept all of these sort of key considerations at the forefront as they were really developing our process. And so the most urgent deadline, like I said, is this ELP Connect deadline. And we had a diverse group, and then we also had, we had our assessment team at the department involved. Of course, special educators from my team, our diverse learners team also sat on this work group to really facilitate these discussions. So you'll see we started in January. I really want to emphasize the work that happened over February and March, where the work group constantly met. We would come to the table and feel like we've got a great tool, we've got a great process. We met, we put it to practice, we took some sample students and took these practitioners, put that tool to practice, and found out there were some edits needed. And so at every point we were making this process stronger, and we were making it clear for IEP teams and really clear guidance on how to make these decisions in this space that are important decisions and decisions that we want to make very carefully. And so then in March, of course, we have engaged with our state special education advisory panel on this tool as we developed it, and throughout the process we have shared this language with them, as well as some other key stakeholders that I'm very engaged with, our DD Council for our state, our Developmental Disabilities Council, and also in sharing it with our Governor's Office Council as well. And so then in April, we've met again, gathering all of that feedback, making some minor edits and some updates. In May, we circulated this tool. We thought, what better way to circulate and get additional field input than having some of our educators who serve all these IEP teams and serve these students participate and work with this tool at Teacher Leader. And so we came out of Teacher Leader with one additional very important edit that they really felt like we want a pupil appraisal signature. So many of you are familiar with your pupil appraisal teams and those folks who are conducting those and acting as that eval coordinator. So we added a signature line. Absolutely, we should have those folks signing off on and saying, yes, I've been a part of this process and in these decisions, making this assessment decision for this student. So we made those edits, and here we are. So you have what we're still calling our draft tool and our draft language until, of course, we get Bessie approval. And once that happens, the future of support around it doesn't stop, right? So then we go to our practitioners in the field again, provide our IEP teams a lot of development and support around making these decisions. And this year, like I stated, this will impact our English learner students with significant disabilities. We'll be able to gain additional feedback, I feel like, this year in this process and using this process, and we'll be able to learn from that and make it even better if we need to. And so, you have a copy of the tool. I'd like to certainly point you to that here as we're talking, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you have about it at the end. And so based on our stakeholder engagement and feedback, we're proposing also the revisions that you see before you to Bulletin 1530, where we have created the actual policy criteria. You will notice that it points in that policy to this tool, because we really feel like our practitioners in the field need the process. They need that guidance on how do I make this decision for these students. And one of the real key things that we want to make note of as well. We did not change, we have not touched the grades 3 through 11 criteria. It is still the same. And so in grades 3 through 11, that criteria to take an alternate assessment is still based on those IQ scores once they begin to give those and the standard deviations below the mean. And so our K2 decision is an important one so that we get to 3rd grade, and if we have placed them and made that decision to give them an alternate assessment in grades K2, then when they get to grade 3, they still meet that criteria. So one of the things you'll see in the policy as well is that we are emphasizing this is an annual decision. And we'll support that as well from the department annually as we communicate with our SPED directors and leaders around this is an annual decision. So there will be ongoing support around that. The majority, like I said, of these revisions around this K2 alternate assessment criteria are in bulletin for 1530. And so you'll see reflected in there all the things that we've talked about this morning, that we're seeking to discourage the use of IQ testing. So if you look on the tool, you'll see if there is an IQ score, we're telling that IEP team, use that information. But if not, we've got to move on, move through the tool, and there are additional criteria that we're looking at based on the instruction, what accommodations, those types of criteria. And so very, conceptually, this K2 alternate assessment criteria is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And we'll continue to emphasize that with our IEP teams making this decision. And so moving forward, we've kind of talked through this ahead of this winter ELT Connect assessment. We're planning several key activities. We're still, once we have BESI approval, we will publish the tool and we'll begin a lot of development, systematic development with our school systems and our IEP teams on using this tool and making those decisions. You all know there will be some key activities that we have to do within our SIR system for IEP teams to be able to make this decision. We're going to keep the same testing timelines that you and your school leaders are used to in terms of making these decisions 30 days prior to the assessment. But we're going to start immediately developing and supporting around the tool for this year. And that ends my update, so we're happy to, I'm happy to stay and answer any questions that you may have.
Do you have any comments, questions from the council? Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. I'd like to go back to the timeline slide. And for spring 2021, the slide says that 438 of the 2021 legislative session requires literacy assessments for all students, grades K through 2. And then you made the statement, haven't been decided upon yet. And this presentation is in reference to K2 alternate assessments. How problematic is it to get into an in-depth conversation about K2 alternate assessments?
If you could use your mic, Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Put the mic a little closer, please.
Yeah.
How problematic is it to get into an in-depth conversation about K2 alternate assessments when the assessment for all students in K2 haven't been decided?
Thank you for that question, Superintendent Jones. So you do see in the timeline, Act 438 of the 2021 legislative session is what put into place the requirement for that K2 literacy screener. We do have some updates coming to our BESI meeting next month, but we are still in the process of selecting that literacy screener. I know I've shared before with this group and with others, it is an arduous process around state procurement, especially for a statewide assessment. We've been through it before with our LEAP exams. We're going through it now with this universal literacy screener for kindergarten through 2nd grade. We're still working through that process and we're still hopeful that procurement will be secured during this school year, which is why back at the beginning, I believe, of the spring semester, we communicated to all school systems that you all were to still use those 4 options for the literacy screener for the beginning of this school year. We are still hopeful that procurement will be completed during this school year, and next school year, that literacy screener will be in place. The work group, and I know Meredith can speak more to this, but I know that the work group was very cognizant of that work going on, and they made sure that this tool and that this policy is broad enough that it applies to this ELT Connect, but it also will apply to that literacy screener. So they were open-minded going into this process, that this is policy and this is a tool that could and should be used for any assessment taken by kindergarten through second grade students.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, and so the ELT Connect is coming up this winter, and so it kind of made us, really need to hone in and go ahead and develop and have an alternate criteria for those students, for our ELT students who need an alternate assessment this year. The work group was very cognizant. You'll see in the tool that the criteria really is broad. It really does focus on, okay, what is the student's exceptionality? By definition, is that one that is considered a significant disability? And then it walks through adaptive, what does their instructional engagement look like? What level of assistive technology? What level of supports? And so I do think, though, to your point, we'll be able to learn from this group of students for these IEP team decisions being made and say, okay, are there anything else that we need to add? Are there any adjustments we need to make once we have a K-2, statewide universal assessment there in that space if that happens?
My thoughts were that you wouldn't want one process to get in front of the other. That's not a plan, and just something I have to say.
Yes, good. Ms. Washington?
I just want to ask a question, Meredith, and you're going to have to refresh my memory on this. All right, this is applying to just the English proficiency test that we're talking about. Currently, K-2 takes those English proficiency tests. So not all K-2 students right now are taking an assessment. We don't have the universal screener, we don't have the assessment, but we do have K-2 English proficiency test that they have to take. So what are you telling us that this process right now just applies to those kids who are taking English proficiency tests?
Correct.
That
This year, yes.
All right, so that's why you feel it's necessary right now? Because these tests are going to be administered this year for English proficiency. All right, once this whole K-2 process for assessment gets adopted, you will potentially revisit this for all K-2 students?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've got some plans in place to really progress monitor, because this is new. This is new K-2 assessment territory for a statewide assessment. And so we've not had an alternate assessment for our English learners, which we know federally is required. So this is meeting, that ELT Connect assessment is meeting that federal requirement to have an alternate assessment, no matter how small that group of students is, though we know it's only about 100 students, that we also have this alternate assessment available for them.
So these kids are going to take, just like our 3 to 11, they're going to take the regular assessment when it gets in place, and they're also going to have to take the English proficiency. So these kids are taking both assessments.
Your English learners who also have a significant disability, they will now take, instead of just taking the English learner proficiency test that all English learners take, they'll take the ELT Connect, the alternate version of that, and they will still take LEAP Connect in grades 3 through 11 for that academic assessment. Yeah, very good question.
Good clarity.
Do you have any other questions, Council?
Did this go to C?
Yes, and we did not have any objection at C.
Yes. Mr. Alexander?
Yeah, I appreciate Dr. Jones and his comment, because it's hurting me. So if we identify a student right now eligible, let's say, And I have to admit that I'm not in the weeds of this right now, right? So I really would need to get some advice from our folks that are. But there's 4 options right now that we use as a screener, so do I understand that? Okay. And so we'll be using that as we move into the 22-23 school year, with the hope of a single screener being the goal, you're saying. So if we identify a kindergartner this year, eligible, and I know it's an annual basis, and we use a particular screener this year that somehow goes away because the universal screener comes into play by the time this child's a first grader, would we continue to use those options for them because they may have qualified under a previous screener, or would we exclude? And look, I may be tackling something I don't intend to.
No, these are great questions. The only students that we're going to use this tool on this year and consider for an alternate assessment are our English learners who may have a significant cognitive disability. And through that IEP process, they're going to use this tool. So for all K2 students, we don't have that literacy assessment. So right now, we don't have a need for an alternate literacy assessment in K2. So those students, we wouldn't even consider, because there's no alternate statewide assessment yet. But to your point, this will require ongoing support, right? Because when we do, and we have that alternate literacy assessment, or whatever that K2 assessment looks like, then we would have to, for any student with a significant disability who may be required to take that literacy assessment and may need an alternate version, IEP teams will use this process or an updated process if we've done that.
So given and look, I realize that federal guidelines and things like that have really pushed us to move more quickly than what we're ready to move, maybe a little bit. So in the event that we are in that posture of the proverbial cart before the horse, we'll be flexible and adjust together and give some grandfathering and things like that in. I mean, the policy's written such that we have some flexibility along the way.
Absolutely. So the policy language is written really from also federal guidance. So you'll see the policy language, that talks about how this is for students with the most significant disabilities, who need the most support in the classroom, who are on alternate standards. That would be consistent, no matter what that alternate assessment looked like. What we can update is our process for our IEP teams to make sure we're making the right decisions. You all, I failed to mention, you all are very familiar with the 1% federal cap on participation for alternate assessments. And so one thing that we really are going to support our IEP teams and our SPED leaders on, and they're very aware, is making sure in this K2 space that we are making the right decisions, that these alternate assessment decisions are for students with the most significant disabilities, because we know that putting a child on an alternate assessment changes their course. And so we can definitely, I think this puts us in a better place, honestly, to be more prepared for when we adopt additional K2 assessments. We've had it ready for the ELP Connect students, and we're able to get some feedback from the field before, and it just happened to fall out this way, before we have to implement this process on a larger scale for more possibly K2 students for a potential literacy assessment.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. What are the grounds for a language barrier being considered a cognitive disability? If they're ELPT students, it would be known that they struggle with English, or that is their scores. So how is that going to take into consideration?
Absolutely. And so our school psychologists and our eval coordinators, we always point them to the assessments that they're using during that eval process and really gaining more information about where our English learners are, because so we have the language potential challenge, but also determining when there's a disability, a significant disability that's also playing into a child's challenges. What we always do is point them to those assessments always have instructions for assessing students who need that assessment in another language. So our pupil appraisal coordinators and those school psychologists who are administering these tests, diagnosticians who understand how to administer this test and have received extensive training on administering these very challenging to understand assessments sometimes, are well equipped to know and understand how to administer these assessments for students who are English learners and may have a disability, because there are some different assessment protocols, to your point.
Any other comments, council, or questions? We have a motion and a second. Do we have a motion to endorse or do I have a motion to endorse or receive the report?
Make a motion, we receive the report.
You already had it back.
Oh, we have that.
Does anyone want to make a substitute motion to endorse, or just go with the receipt?
We have a motion and a second to receive the report. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item 3.3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding continuous learning. Yes,
We need a motion to receive.
we have a motion to receive. Motion by Mr. Kennedy and a second by Mr. Jones. Mike, say so.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins. So our next item is around continuous learning, and it also includes some pieces on remote attendance. So just to remind you all, we came to our last Superintendents Advisory Council meeting, and we talked about continuous learning. This really began with some legislation back during the 2020 legislative session that created the Continuous Learning Task Force. We are very grateful for Superintendent Powell and Superintendent Kennedy, who served on that task force throughout 2021, really studying best practices in continuous learning, things that we learned from the pandemic, from what folks across the nation learned from the pandemic, what we've learned from hurricanes and other disasters, and really shoring up some strong continuous learning guidance that we've been able to produce as a department with the help of that task force and their input. So more recently, we know that Bessie has had a lot of interest in remote attendance and how can we ensure quality during remote instruction. And so we were directed, the department was directed by our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education to develop policy for remote attendance. And we were directed to gather some consensus in the field. And so we brought this to the SAC meeting, I believe back in May, and we had some discussion about it then. And then we had some ongoing stakeholder feedback and input over the last few months. And so today, Ashley Townsend, our Executive Director of Policy and Governmental Affairs, will take us through what has happened really since that last SAC meeting and from that engagement and really where we're situated now to bring some policy changes potentially.
Thank you, Chesnor. Good morning. Thank you for letting me have a few minutes of your time today to talk about continuous learning. The task force did make recommendations in 4 key areas. Those were technology, planning, school planning and system planning, instructional quality, and family and engagement and support. And what we're asking you to do today is to basically partner with us over the next year in deciding what that continuous learning planning should look like locally. And that's going to come in a couple of different ways. If you'll look in your packet, you do have these policy drafts with you. You'll see drafts to Bulletin 741 and 741 non-public. And those policy revisions center on 2 different areas. The first key area is to create a written continuous learning plan. And this will go to that list of written policies and procedures that LEAs develop and keep on file. And this is something that we're asking you to update annually, review with your stakeholders, post to your LEA website so that it's accessible by all of your stakeholders. And I'm going to share with you a couple of ways in which we're planning to partner with and support you in that development over the next year. The second piece is to establish a remote attendance policy that best fits your resources and your structure within your district. And this will also go into 741 non-public so that those schools as well can plan for continuous learning. Essentially, this goes down to planning. In Louisiana, we are really good at preparing for things because we have to prepare for so much here. And essentially, this is just doing our due diligence to make sure that we're ready for anything that comes up. So if you look at the section 1104, this will be a new section in Bulletin 741 specifically dedicated to remote attendance. What this is designed to do is to offer a definition for remote instruction, which can be kind of elusive at times to settle on one specific definition for that, but a definition for remote instruction, for hybrid instruction, and then a foundation upon which you can build your local policy around this. So we are affirming the statutory requirement that attendance be checked each school day and at the beginning of each class period, which we know will look different depending on your learning format in the event of a shift to modified operations. Then on top of that, we're asking you to set some expectations for synchronous and asynchronous remote learning. If you're in a synchronous setting, and again, this may shift from one day to the next, you may prefer to allow that flexibility within your local policy. If you're in a synchronous setting, that may look like everyone logging into an online streaming platform at the same time to participate in a synchronous learning experience. However, if you're asynchronous that day, that could be something digital, it could be something paper-based. We know that that looks a lot of different ways, and we want to provide you the flexibility and local autonomy to develop what works best for you. So as you look through that remote attendance policy, you'll see in the slide deck, it shows our end of it, that we're providing this baseline set of expectations. In the policy, you'll see for both of those items that we're asking you to define and establish what those expectations look like. So what evidence is acceptable as a student's participated in an asynchronous learning activity? Those are things that you really need to examine with your team, and we're providing several resources to help you do that that I'll touch on in just a minute. For synchronous learning, that definition will depend on your own system, what resources you have in place, what's available to you geographically and locally. Then if you look at the next slide, talking about some definitions and some FAQ there, this will be applicable to students who are enrolled in a course that is typically on-site, in-person, face-to-face. But for whatever reason, that course has shifted temporarily to a remote instructional delivery model. And so this could be in the event of any different kinds of situations. We're trying to make it very open to address all those different situations that may occur. But it'll apply to those students who are supposed to be in person. We're typically in person, and then we're shifting for a time. Then we're asking that you communicate these expectations to your families, to your stakeholders at the beginning of the school year and upon initiation of continuous learning. In other words, at the beginning of the year, if the situation occurs, here's what this will look like, here's what will be expected, and then in the event something does happen, remind everyone, remember these are our expectations, this is how this is going to work. Then to touch on the continuous learning plans, we are asking that those plans address those key areas that were mentioned in the task force report. And so you'll see those same 4 key areas that were mentioned by the task force: technology, school and system planning, instructional quality, family engagement and support, with the addition of attendance to build in your own local attendance policy there. Now, we've provided a really great resource that Dr. Chesson mentioned a minute ago, and that is our continuous education toolkit. In this toolkit, you'll find links to a number of resources to assist you in your planning. Everything from a template to help you build your team and pull together the right people to inform this work. You'll see model plans from several districts, both within and outside of Louisiana, to serve as a strong model for things you may want to include. And there are links to a number of resources that have been found helpful in thinking through all the different topics that you have to think through for something like this. It's a lot. You'll see too that we've added in that date of June 30th. This was a date that we heard from many of you as reasonable to expect that it may take a full school year to develop this plan this year. You'll need time to pull together this team to really think through all the ramifications and to do it right. And another support this allows us to offer is at Teacher Leader Summit next year, we're going to host a System Leaders Continuous Learning Roundtable. And what we'll ask you to do to that is we'll invite you to come together, share what you've learned throughout the year, the questions you've come up against, the ideas that your team has put together for how to best address this, and then maybe walk away with some ideas that you may want to include in your own plans before that June 30th date. After that, you can work revising and updating the plan annually into your own annual planning calendar, however that best fits you. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Do we have any questions or comments from the council? Ms. Townsend?
I apologize, Mr. Jenkins, I do have a question. So, is there any way we can, this will go to Bessie in August?
Yes, sir.
Just for clarity here, does this go into effect as we start school this year, that we have to have all of this in place by then?
The plan is to run this as notice of intent, so it'll still go through that 90-day period of advertisement in the register, which would put it effective around January 20th. And again, this plan comes all year to develop, so June 30th of next year is when that plan.
So should we unfortunately experience the things we do, especially in South Louisiana, and have to shift to online instruction here in the months of August or September, we would be operating as we've done previously, as we do continuous learning using online instruction, not under any sort of new standards at that time.
Right, we wouldn't be able to expect you to have that plan in place before that June 30th date. Now, I know many of you have already done a lot of planning this, you already have plans in place.
Sure.
You may have seen the toolkit and been able to make some adjustments and gather some ideas from that as well.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably true everywhere. So just for clarity here, could the June 30th, 2023 be written into this policy?
We could do that, we could do beginning in June 2023 and then annually by June 30th.
Right. That would, give it clarity to our communities, our families who look this up. June 30th is a pretty arbitrary date.
Absolutely, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Jenkins, just one other point if I could. Yes, I think that's a great idea that David has given us. But as I'm looking and listening to this, I'm just wondering, we still have our virtual students. We're still keeping our virtual going, which would be a plan in itself. And then you have the others in case we are out for an extended period of time, where we would also be putting together some type of continuous learning for those, if it is a tornado, if it's something like that. So does all of that come into one plan together? Or is it two separate plans that we would be formulating for continuous learning?
So we understand that many of you have adopted virtual schools essentially within your districts already, which is the reason that we specify this policy is applicable to students who are enrolled in a typically on-site course, just to differentiate that. Now, in your local attendance policy, you may choose to address each of those scenarios. And in that continuous learning toolkit, there's also guidance for addressing short-term, mid-term, and long-term modified operations.
So is there any type of template that we're looking at to stay consistent statewide on how we're going to put these together?
There is, and it's not a required template, but it is a pretty comprehensive document, and it's linked there on that first page of that continuous learning toolkit, and it walks you through people to consider putting on your team, questions to ask, stakeholders to engage, and also we're happy to make adjustments to that as you go throughout this year. This is a very new area, this whole development of continuous learning. So if you see adjustments or other things you think through throughout the year, we will be eager to hear your feedback in that roundtable at Teacher Leader as well to make improvements on our end to the guidance that we offer. Thank you for that.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, similar question, maybe just a little more clarity. Do these requirements apply to the schools that are 100% virtual? And the specific example would be attendance.
Virtual schools are already required to submit their attendance plans annually, and so that's addressed elsewhere in policy.
Okay, so that was one example, but back to the original question, do the requirements here apply to both?
They could, well, they would need to create a continuous learning plan. Their shift to modified operations would look a lot different probably than a brick and mortar school shift to modified operations, and so they probably would be able to work in a lot of their existing structures into their continuous learning plan. But it would be smart to think through, what if you don't have electricity? What if you don't have access to your network for a period of time? I think in Louisiana, we are very good at planning, and I think it's smart for us, now that we know exactly what can happen in different situations, it's smart to think through different possible outcomes and how we would respond in those situations.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Henry.
For clarity, is this for all learners, or like, could it be used for students with extenuating circumstances that may have attendance problems? I think he asked that.
We did specify in the applicability paragraph there that this could extend to students who are physically unable to attend on-site, and that is something that you could clarify in your local policy as well.
Do you have any other questions or comments?
Mr. Jenkins, should we, if we all agree on adding a 2023 date in there, should we do that in some sort of official way?
You should.
Can you guide me in that?
Yes, would you like to just continue to receive the report with a recommendation, or do you want to endorse the report? Endorse the policy?
I'm asking that we
I know
consider
that
the
you-
2023
Right.
before we endorse the policy.
Okay. That would have helped me combine the two, but you can make the recommendation that Bessie clarify the start date for the required continuous learning plans to June 30th.
I recommend that
Of
Bessie
2023.
update the required start date for the continuous learning plan to June 30th of 2023, giving school systems this year to properly develop their approach. And until then, we continue using what we're doing with continuous learning, which quite frankly is probably it's probably going to be well done anyway, as it's been done, because we're all completely comfortable with shifting in and out of this. So I would say we have this in place, but just so we have an opportunity to make sure we're doing it, following some of the guidance now that you provided us.
We have a motion.
I would second that.
Okay, I have a second. Over. Okay. Anyone opposed? Okay.
We still have the motion to receive, so is there any other discussion that needs to happen regarding this?
Well,
Do I need to say anything opposed to receiving?
we have a motion and a second. Do we have any opposition to, those in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Thank you. Agenda item 3.1, consideration of an updated report regarding student attendance rates and the STAR task force. Do we have a motion to receive in a second? Second by Mr. Jones, and a second by Mr. Carter. Mr. Chesson?
Good morning, everyone. Quintina Temple here to talk about the launch of the STAR Task Force. Last Bessie meeting, we introduced this topic. We had a few experts sit with us to talk about not only our attendance and truancy data, chronic absenteeism data, but we also talked about the need for stronger collaboration that moves towards coordination amongst all stakeholders. And so on the 26th, I believe that was Tuesday, we launched our task force. We invited about 30 committee members or task force members. We had about 20 respond, indicating that they would accept the invitation, and then in person, we had about 15 show up. We had several that had to cancel the morning of the meeting for various reasons. We had a mix of many stakeholders who are a part of the process. So we had elected officials, we had judges in the room, board member, Ronnie Morris, who was named Mr. Bessie throughout the entire meeting. He was called Mr. Bessie. We had, yes, Mr. Bessie. We had legislators that had been invited, FINS representative, PTA representative, school system leaders, school leaders. We just had a mix of entities present
to really engage in a dialogue that we typically find ourselves when we're talking about truancy and chronic absenteeism, pointing the finger at one group or another because we see failures in the system and we're trying to identify those failures. So it was a really robust conversation around critical issues, critical barriers that each one of these groups experienced. And then we did some mixed grouping to allow them to talk about solutions to the critical barriers. And so we spent a good part of our day rectifying miscommunication, resolving probably clarification that needed to happen around processes. And through a lot of that discussion, we were able to land on 4 critical barriers that we needed to prioritize. And those critical barriers, I'll look at my notes now. Those critical barriers existed around a systemic approach statewide. So we know that within LEAs, within our judicial system, many systems approach how they handle chronic absenteeism or truancy in very different ways. And so our judges there, it's like we need a flow chart. We need a systemic process that we can share. We know that there will be differentiation. However, that was one of the recommendations. Prioritizing resources across the state at the LEA level, within agencies, so that was a recommendation, and with all stakeholders, unifying our identification process and being able to track data that is more reliable. We had a lot of conversation about the reliability of our truancy, of our chronic absenteeism data. And so that was another recommendation. And then really offering student-centered root cause solutions, because we know if we have students who are chronically absent or truant, that many times it is just beyond them not being at school. And so offering not only resources, but leveraging resources that may exist to really address the root cause. And one of the things that I think really elevated in this conversation, and it came from some of our school and system leaders, that throughout the pandemic, many schools had to really elevate their presence in more than just academics. And so the request from that group was, we need the support of LDH, we need the support of DCFS in a very different way than we're getting right now. And we had those state agencies present to really hear the call or the cry from not only the judges, but also school system leaders. And so that was, again, another robust conversation. And so as we move forward, our group, they're ready to meet every 6 weeks. I think some went in 4 weeks, but they're ready to meet every 6 weeks. So we're looking to have our second meeting around the week of October 5th, and we will have more concrete date and a time and date set during that week. Some of our near-term, I'll say, next steps. An attendance awareness campaign that we plan to launch in September. So we have some work going into play to establish a proclamation around attendance and really launch an attendance awareness campaign statewide. Explore a student badging scanning system that came highly recommended by the judges. And one thing that we realized is that would not only help with attendance, but also with school safety. And so that was a recommendation that we need to explore further. Exploring LEA and system-wide reporting of truancy data in a way that we do not do it currently. And so we need to explore what that could look like and what it should look like. And then I'll also provide a more in-depth report at our next BESI meeting when we talk about some of the things that we've had to explore in this space of time between now and our BESI meeting. And so I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or any comments to add.
Do you have any questions or comments from the council? Any questions or comments from the council? Is that it? Okay. Thank Dr. Tim, you did a great job here. You don't have any questions or comments? All right. We have a motion to receive the report. Those in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you. Agenda item 3.5, consideration of an update report regarding the accountability study group. Motion to receive. I have a motion by Mr. Kirby. Second. 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 Second by Ms. Clark. Okay. Dr. Dimple.
Yes, Dr. Tuma will start. I am going to probably get just a little informal, just because I want to speak to the educators and appeal to the educators. We have sat in this seat many times as educators, embracing change and just embracing changes to our accountability system. I remember when we did away with stars and went to letter grades, and we had to embrace that change. And so as educators, I appeal to you because I know in many cases you are change agents. You're called to lead improvement within your system. You're called to be lead learners. And so as we think about the change that is before us, and we've sat in this seat before, we put ourselves in a position to think about what is our call to action. What do we consider when we hear the proposal, and then what is our reaction? And so I want to talk about just how I've had to approach various things. So I know last week, Dr. Bromley, Assistant Superintendent Foltz, and Assistant Superintendent Lambert traveled the state really talking about the proposal, the accountability proposal that's on the table, asking for input, asking for feedback in certain spaces, and really just having a discussion. And we have received a lot of comments about that experience. And one comment that resonates with me, and it resonates with me because many times as educators we use the term buy-in. We're trying to get buy-in. And many times I dispel that because I feel like as educators, we're not here to sell. But we are here to ask for a shared commitment and ownership for every student in our state. And that shared commitment and ownership for every student in our state is based on our commitment that they matriculate through our educational system ready. Ready for a career, ready for college, ready for service. And I know that we all share that commonality. And so when we hear what will be presented in the accountability proposal, I ask that you consider first, where do you find agreement? Where do we find agreement? Where do we align with what's being presented? Many times that's a great starting place. And when we offer recommendations, when we offer feedback, I agree with X, and we be very specific about that. Secondly, I would ask that we give feedback and input on the very specific things that they are asking of us. I think on slide 26, today there's going to be a slide around timeline. Now, how and the when should we move forward with elements of the accountability proposal? And so there's a very deliberate and intentional space where your voice is needed. And so we are asking for feedback there. Thirdly, I would ask in this call to action that where you find disagreement and misalignment in your belief system and with the proposal, that you not only acknowledge that very specific place, but that you also counter. You offer a counter recommendation, a counter solution, and be very specific so that that can be taken back to the accountability study group, so that it can be taken back to Bessie. And finally, as educators, It's what we always do. We rise to the occasion. We rise to the occasion, we rise to the expectation, and we teach, and we inspire, and we lead change within our respective spaces. The last thing that I will say here, as an educator, I'll model this process. So I'm in a doctor's office, and I'm being told, your blood sugar level is extremely high, and you're moving towards a very dangerous place. So you need to make some changes. You need to consider working out, you need to make some lifestyle changes to improve your quality of life, to improve your life expectancy. You have to do something differently. So I'm gonna apply this change model process. So I'm listening to the doctor, and I can say, you know what? I'm gonna live, and I'm just gonna die this way. This is how I am. This is what it is. Or I'm gonna find a place of agreement. I agree with you. I'm looking at my blood sugar numbers. It is off the chart. It's going in the wrong direction. We've talked about this before. I need to make some changes. These are the changes that I need to make. And when I set a course, I set a plan, and we find a place of agreement. And then the doctor says, well, can't have desserts anymore, no carbs. And I say, hold up. I disagree with that, but let me offer a counter. What about 30% carbs? Maybe a dessert on Saturdays. We rebuttal. And then I rise to the expectation. And so here I am, 12 years later, 80 pounds lighter. I have completed several 10Ks, 5Ks, half marathons, and I occasionally eat dessert, rice, and pasta, and enjoy the Louisiana cuisine that I've come to appreciate. And so, again, I just appeal to you all. We're going to resist the status quo together, and we're going to embrace change and find that place of agreement, offer specific counters, and give feedback when we are being asked to give feedback. At this time, I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Lambert.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. I'm going to be looking back this way because that is not on, so not trying to be rude. So we're going to go through an overview, timeline, grading scale, talk about high school, through growth, and K through 2, and then next steps. So this slide kind of walks through the road we've been on. You'll see the initial development that there was a proposal that came through the Accountability Commission and this council last year, and then went to Bessie, was considered. Bessie ultimately determined that they wanted to study this further and formed a study group. That study group has been meeting, and they have put together a set of proposals that they wanted feedback on, and that's where we are today. The board study group identified several key goals they were interested in resolving. One was ensuring the results are clear and easy to understand. Another was modifying the career readiness standard so that it's aligned up with 3 through 8. And the next one is strengthening the system's growth component so that growth is incentivized and rewarded. And lastly, maintaining Louisiana's proficiency standard. We've gone through and mapped the study group's goals against the ways that the proposal seeks to meet those. One, it increases clarity by shifting away from a 150-point scale. 2, it raises expectations that graduates of an A high school earn strong credentials. 3, it aligns the ACT and WorkKeys Index to utilize their assessment aligned to their diploma pathway. 4, it directs the department to resolve concerns within our current growth index. And 5, it increases the focus of our high schools. The amount that our high school calculation of SPS focuses on student proficiency as measured by the LEAP. So the following slide includes information to help frame the discussion around some potential or feasible timelines to implement changes to the way that we calculate and measure college and career acceleration. We'll still discuss the proposal at length. When considering the timeline, it's important to note that 3 through 8 high school assessment-based outcomes are generally measures aligned with previous incentives. In high school, that's different. High school graduation outcome-based factors have a delay in their inclusion in the formula, which is why the tables provided to help us think through how do we balance the timely implementation of these important shifts with the amount of time it will take for school systems to build really rigorous and robust, great programming that they want to provide to their school systems, or to their students in their school system. So from there, wanted to just get thoughts around, all of you have seen these proposals before, Dr. Brumley, Mr. Foltz, myself, Amelia Urban, we went through and visited with superintendents across the state over the last week. Curious what people's thoughts and reflections are around a timeline for implementation based off of those conversations.
I'll go first. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, though. Just our response to whatever is decided upon, to me, is most critical. I don't think we're ever going to agree on all of the parts. I think if we can agree on the whole relative to the timeline, that would be most helpful. So obviously the bottom row gives the most time to respond. Concern I have is if we go any quicker than that, we're really, our students who are making a decision now, or who have made a decision, we start school next week, on their pathway, they will be pursuing their specific pathway as a junior beginning next week. If we move any quicker than that, we're in some cases putting the cart before the horse, I'm afraid. So my suggestion and hope would be that we would consider that in the process and move toward a ramp that gives time for districts to respond to the continued rigorous pain.
That's helpful. So to summarize, you would say the last row or a row below that row?
Yes, that was the best option you gave me.
There's a limit to how much you can fit on this. I understand.
I just want to reiterate what Clay said. It's going to take time. It's going to be a mind shift change that has to happen at a younger grade. We've already committed as our school system to start getting in front of our 7th graders early, because as 8th grade, they've already started to think about their future at that time. So getting in front of our 7th graders to start taking advantage of some of the opportunities that we grant them in 8th grade in our school system. So, I'm not trying to push it down the road, just saying it's going to take time to build capacity and change the mindset of some of these families and what they expect from high school and what high school looks like. It's going to be different for many of our students. So I just think we have to take that into account. Like I said, I'm not trying to kick the can down the road. I'm just saying we need to adequately prepare for what the future looks like.
When I say respond to, I just want to be clear. So resource allocation is number one. Staffing is a big concern, obviously, for us when you start to make shifts in course offerings, in some of those highest, industry-based credentials, advanced offerings require some specialties that many of us in rural districts, and not just rural districts, but across the state, are struggling to find just a bachelor degree body to fill the classroom, much less someone who's capable and able and certified to teach some of those higher level courses. So resource allocation and staffing and all of that, along with what Mr. Jabby is saying, I think it's critical to provide a little bit longer ramp than what we might initially feel would be appropriate.
And developing robust partnerships take time.
Absolutely.
Some of this won't be in-house, some of it will be folks coming in.
Agreed.
In agreement with Dr. Corden, we also have to look at from a planning standpoint. Most of our students receive guidance on a high school career starting in the 9th grade. Currently, right now, our ninth graders already have guidance. So we're talking about possibly introducing this as far as the guidance is concerned next school year. Also, those students, according to the new proposed strength of diploma guidance, we would have to start off, excuse me, we would have to start offering college credit to those students in ninth grade, for those students to maximize the opportunity to earn an associate's degree or an apprenticeship. So that is, in addition to the superintendent said here today, I think we also have to take that into consideration when we're talking about guiding those students and providing them resources they need, especially if we're trying to get them to obtain an associate's degree by the end of their high school career, which I think is around 60 credit hours. Thank you.
Do we have any comments?
Mr. James?
Yes.
So since you offered it, a line below the line, I do want to make mention that we're talking about a timeline before we fully discuss our feedback around the actual strength diploma, right? So assuming that we are going to make some changes to the strength diploma, we don't know what those are. I think superintendents have already echoed or spoken, and I echo what they would say, is that the best scenario for all of us, from the standpoint of how programs that we're offering, is certainly we'll be making those transitions pretty quickly, and those opportunities would avail themselves to our current sophomores and juniors. I mean, our seniors should be gone by the time it is. But that doesn't mean that we're starting to count those plans. So as we create those opportunities under these new guidelines, then that doesn't exclude the cohorts there of 2024, 2025 from being engaged in that and perhaps taking advantage of some of that. But for us, I think what I'm hearing here, I think Clay, Mr. Corley said it best, the best option you're giving us right now is fall of 2026, which would be our, as I understand it, last year's freshman. Would that be correct? Yes. And so if we did current sophomores, and the best scenario would be something, we're talking about this year's freshman does give us some time as we create plans, we can sort of begin to create plans around what we think is going to happen. Whereas we don't have as much opportunities for those. And again, there's a lot of shifts that are going to take place. Staffing shifts, partnerships, as you referenced, new partnerships in a lot of ways. So this is, as it's written, this is going to require some work around what we need to be doing, and hopefully we'll all find a way to agree on what that need is and identify what is best. But as we transition to something, we need more time to do what I would say is even more chart.
That's helpful. We've gone through this presentation a few times with different folks, and we've gone back and forth on where the timeline should go. The timeline seems to resolve some concerns, at least the immediate concern of how fast is this going to happen, but it's being presented before the thing's being presented, so we can come back to it at the end, but we did shift and move it to the beginning because we found that that was the moment during our conversations where things started to become like, okay, there's a timeline here. So we'll come back to the timeline at the end.
Mr. Lambert, let me just ask a question for clarification. There's been a lot of discussion since the spring, moving through the summer, today, the last week with all the different superintendents. Suggestions being made on the timeline, you will take these back to the work group ultimately, and then the work group would make a decision as to what to take to Bessie in August. Is that how all this kind of pieces together?
That sounds right. They could also, the study group could also ask the department to do additional engagement and come with a recommendation in August. But we anticipate going to the study group, having them determine what that is, unless they tell us otherwise.
So the different suggestions and comments and conversations that we have will be taken back to the study group for them to make a decision moving forward.
That's right. Very good.
Thank you.
One addition, so just relative to the timeline, has there been any discussion about and I'm assuming this timeline is just like, this is when we would shift completely to the new policy. Has there been any discussion about sunsetting and or a gradual fade away of certain provisions in the current policies and a ramp toward fully implementing the new, instead of just kind of we're cutting it off here and we're starting from scratch, so to speak, in 1 year?
We could look at that. We'll go back to the team and talk about that.
Because I think there are elements of the new proposal that are currently in place. I mean, we already incentivize, advanced credentials and those kind of things, so there's some incentive and some plan to, educate kids around those things that are part of the new plan, maybe not to the degree that we need to be, currently responding to that. But I was just curious as to like other options from a transition standpoint.
What do you think about that?
I had a comment. Based on a timeline, I wanted to know from your perspective, what would be the benefits of starting at an earlier time versus a later time, just from your perspective?
From my perspective, the benefit is that, one, accountability systems exist to inform the public about how well school systems and schools are serving their community. And from my perspective, what's being proposed is a really good measure of whether young people are getting the thing that they need in order to succeed in post-secondary life. The drawback, if you believe that the measure needs to be really good to inform the public, and that's the primary driver, the challenge is that it's also a measure that we use to determine how well school systems are operating and how they're responding to those incentives. And we created an accountability system that had a set of incentives in it that folks did because they were told these are the right things for kids. They did those things, and you would be changing the rules of the game after the game has been played in a lot of cases. So the benefit of doing it earlier is that one is a really accurate measure, I think, of how schools are preparing young people for the next thing. The challenge is that our formula hasn't incentivized that before, and you're changing the rules of the road afterward. The last benefit would be that it would put the foot on the accelerator to make it move faster, which would be good for kids. But also, there are certain things that you're going to have to be able to respond to very fast, and with the accountability system, graduation data is lagged, and you can't get a kid an advanced credential in 1 year. So that there's benefits, but there's also a level of fairness, I think, to holding people accountable to the thing that you told them that you were going to hold them accountable to. Does that help or not?
It does, but then it has me thinking of something else.
So with that said, Mr. Member, of those 4 SPS years, which year do you recommend the implementation?
We've heard a lot of feedback. Superintendents have been pretty consistent about the last row or the row after. And that is what the feedback we will give to the study group.
My question
There are times when we don't answer each other's questions. I learned from somebody here.
So one other question. I attended the 4 public meetings of the study group. So at the last meeting, it was centered around sharing out the 5 recommendations, and even spoke to a timeline for feedback, for input. But I don't recall a conversation about the study group meeting again, or timelines for the study group meeting. And I'm kind of hearing you say, I'll take it back. So can you kind of share what the thought process is in reference to the study group coming back together? Is it going to be before the August visit meeting?
It will be. If you go back and look at the slides from the last meeting, there's a slide that talks about the timeline, and it has on there that the study group will convene again should it be necessary following the feedback. We anticipated that it would be. We figured we would get a lot of good feedback. So we have finalized 2 dates with rooms booked, and now we are finalizing with members of that study group which of those 2 dates are the right ones, and it would be prior to the next BESI meeting.
So how will those meetings be? Because the meetings of the study group that I attended, many of them didn't offer an opportunity for public input. those meetings be set up in a similar manner?
This would have an action item, which would mean that there would be public comment.
Mr. Thomas, you said, the feedback would be given to this group first. In what format would that be presented? Because I've also attended quite a few meetings and presentations, and I've heard the feedback from different stakeholder groups. Are some of the considerations being weighted in such a way and presented in such a way to the group that expresses the concerns or more concerns with certain areas of the recommendations than others?
We'll do our best to be a really unbiased arbiter of what we're hearing. I also would encourage that if you have a particular perspective on a particular issue that you think is really important, that you email members of the study group directly. I'm sure they would love to hear the feedback directly, but I will do my best to be a non-biased arbiter of the information that I've received. Whether I agree or disagree, it's important that we share what folks are saying about it and make sure that your voice is heard. Their email addresses, we can give them to you if you need them.
And has there ever been any consideration of a survey of any type to different stakeholder groups such as principals, superintendents, or other organizations that relative to the main priorities that was probably more data-driven based on what's been presented?
There is a survey that is live on the Louisiana Department website that we have, I think, 800 respondents to at this point.
Not qualitative, quantitative.
Many of the questions are quantitative. There are qualitative questions in there as well.
Comment. Assuming we have an earlier start, what does addressing the data look like if there's a decline? Like, once we get the data back, if we start earlier, what does the next steps look like?
Can you say more about what if there's a decline?
If we were to implement this at an earlier rate, and we get our new SPS and their decline, it's a decline, like what does the next step look like?
Well, we would expect there would be a decline, right? I think that if it's implemented earlier, we would have to really talk about what the transition looks like to those higher standards. And that would be a different conversation that, based off what the study group tells us at the next meeting, we would then engage in that conversation with them about, does it make sense to have a transition timeline similar to what Mr. Corley mentioned? And we've seen transition policies in a variety of different flavors in the state, right? At one point, it was holding steady the percent of schools, A, B, C, D, F, in the original curving for several years, and then it locked in at some point. The current transition policies that exist in Louisiana are built around the transition of what it means to be an A, 90, 95, 100. So we have examples from the recent past of how to do this.
So, question for myself. Based upon some of the feedback that I've heard today, is there a particular recommendation that you will make to the study group in terms of that timeline? I've heard everything, and maybe my interpretation of what's being said is it's not on the screen yet. It could be from 27, fall of 27 or 28. I think Mr. Darby was talking about 8th graders, so that would be 28, if my calculations are correct. So is there any recommendations that potentially, based upon the conversation you've had with the other superintendents at the different locations, or in this conversation today that you will be bringing back?
I said earlier what I intend to say, but if it needs to be changed based off of what y'all are saying today, tell me. What I have heard in most of the conversations that we had over the last week was the last row of this table or the row underneath the last row. We could modify that to say after that last row, but that is a very, very long time from now in terms of children and impact. So I just would ask that y'all have that conversation and give me clear direction of what y'all are thinking.
So just for my clarity, so we're talking fall of 27 is what I'm hearing? 26.
Fall of '26 or fall of '27 is the most consistent thing that I've heard. And I've heard pretty consistently no earlier than fall of 2025. If push really, it could be done, but it would be very, very aggressive, and would not give a lot of time, and people would likely not be scaled up yet.
Go ahead, Kim. Dr.
Yeah, just if I recall from regions 1 and 3, we were adamant about being fall of 2027 to give schools and school systems the amount of time to make the shifts necessary to align with the current accountability system that's being recommended.
Dr.
So, just hearing everybody have conversations and making their comments, I think it's clear that we're not trying to avoid accountability. Doing this soon for such a significant change doesn't allow many districts to prepare for the change. If we push out info, the goal is to have the public informed about what is going on. They'll get skewed data. And so no matter what that transition looks like, if it's being reported out that that's a decline and they don't understand what that actually means, then their understanding of what we're doing may be completely different than what's actually happening inside the buildings. I think if we push it back to either fall 26 or fall 27, the way that we can prepare as a state to have people ready for that without people just sitting back and saying, I'm not going to do anything until that time comes. Whenever this policy has been vetted out and y'all decided that this is what we're going to do, develop some type of rubric, send it out to the districts, have them to track what they're doing in relationship to meeting that expectation for the time that that comes about. And then y'all provide a support system that allows us to get to that particular point. If we don't do that, and I really don't think that if we say we're going to go to fall 26 or fall 27, somebody says, whew, we got that monkey off our back, we're not going to do anything until that time comes. So I think if we put a support system in place while this is being developed, the pressure is not on anybody to try to perform now in relationship to not being prepared to that performance. And I think if we clearly understand what change looks like, you should be informing, training, supporting, developing that accountability system, and then implementing it. And it's almost like we're doing the implementing part before we get to any of those other parts. So I think if the conversation becomes, it's an urgency now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to do anything until that time comes. It means we get to thoroughly prepare to whereas when it does count, we're fully prepared to be successful. If you want to set up people for failure, put them in a system that will allow them not to be ready for what that system is requiring them to do. And we keep talking about teachers being frustrated, principals being frustrated, the accountability, the teacher shortages. This adds that level of frustration when people feel like they're put in a situation that they're not prepared to be successful in. So I think if we use that as a narrative to say why we should push back, it may allow the study group to feel more comfortable with us saying we want to move it back to fall 26, fall 27.
That's helpful. Anything else on transition timeline? Okay. Letter grades or scale. Looking at clarity, we've heard from folks that a 100-point scale is more intuitive, easier to understand. Over the course of time, our accountability system has gone from a 200-point scale, where sometimes people went over 200 points, to a 150-point scale, which we currently have now. And this proposal would take us to a 100-point scale with the 25 incentive points on top, much like we currently have. 100 is our expectation, and 50 when a school or system exceeds it. For example, 50 additional points when a student scores mastery, that would become 25 additional points or 50 additional points when a student scores advanced. It would go to 25 points when the student scores advanced. So we would keep the expectation when a school meets the expectation at 100, and when they exceed that expectation, they would get 25 points on top of that. Any initial reactions to 100-point scale being easier to understand, decreasing the 50 incentive points to 25 incentive points?
Quick question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Will the letter grade also change, the scale for the letter grade change?
I would expect that that would be something that would be discussed as we go through and model out what the results look like. When we ran these simulations, we provided a letter grade scale that kept elementary school letter grades fairly consistent. And that resulted in a shift downward of the mark for an A because we've taken 25 points off the top.
So you're talking about proposing the scale that you proposed in past iterations of that proposed scale not changing. Is that what you're saying? One that you proposed, I don't know, a few months ago, that's the scale you're looking at?
I would imagine that would be part of a transition policy that would be set based off of the way that we set that, that scale. So that scale is based off of assessment data that's several years old. It's based off of a variety of other factors that likely we will refresh the data based off of more recent results to kind of make sure that we're getting exactly what we want out of this.
So the answer is no, that won't be the proposed scale. It will be based upon whatever the results are that you're looking at the time.
We'll discuss that with the study group.
All right, and you're looking at 25 incentive points. And I've talked to you about this before, but I'd like you to say in front of the group, on the cohort grad rate, where you plan to put in a mechanism for those 25 incentive points as well. It'll be in every indicator.
Yeah, we anticipate that it'll actually look a lot like what the 150 looks like right now. There's a point at which your graduation rate is multiplied by 0.9 versus 1.11111, that repeating, I think it ends with a 9, but it's a very long repeating number. And that will just be the same way that we do all of the other things above 125. Divide the number of points between the top and the 100 cut point, and change what that multiplier looks like. So it would be the same.
And just a suggestion, I think it would be very helpful when all these proposals are made, that these points that we're asking, in terms of some of these details on scales, and what it really looks like, that it be along with whatever the proposal is, so that people can have some type of a concrete feeling on what does that really mean. So whatever that proposal is going to be, I think we would all like to see the entire proposal, what it really look like.
That's helpful, thanks. Okay, moving to high school. Louisiana's Vision for Success, students persist through graduation, they explore and define a plan for the future, they accelerate their journey to career readiness, and then they build a feasible path to post-secondary education. We pulled some data together to just ground us in where we are. I think that we all understand the importance of making sure that we prepare young people for what comes after high school. So we pulled some data together to kind of show the lay of the land as it is today. 37% of our high school students are scoring at proficiency on their high school LEAP tests. Meanwhile, 82% of our students in 10th grade are on I am going to a college or a university 4-year path. These two data points sit together and it makes you kind of wonder, right? How good is our assessment? Is that the problem? Are our young people persisting and successful when they get to college? And then you look at the next data point, which is among our students, among our graduates, what percent of them are enrolled in college for 1 full year and then choose to come back? And it's only about 42%. So it's not causal, it's just a correlation. It's two data points that sit next to each other that are fairly consistent over time. But what we're seeing is we're saying that we're preparing 82% of our young people for 4-year universities, and then ultimately only 42% of them are persisting for a full year, which is just a data point for us to mull over for a moment.
And then, Mr. Thomas, before you go on, just because referencing data points without a context, I think sometimes can lead to misperception about the actual data itself. And I know that you pulled this from 10th grade data, but most students in our high schools don't necessarily choose a jumpstart pathway sometimes well after their junior and or senior year. As well as you're talking about the second year of college, which is often referred to as a student's persistence in college. Our responsibility is to prepare and provide opportunities for students after high school, entering high school. So I think the more reflective approach potentially could be the first year entering college, as well as junior and senior percentage of students who are actually college bound. Instead of, to me, a very skewed set of data points to reference to drive the particular initiatives that we plan to drive.
Yeah, I try really hard to present unbiased information, and I can rattle off the other data point for you. 56% of our students enter college the first fall after they graduate. So the delta is 82% to 56%. And when you look at seniors, the percent of students on the career path graduating is even lower. So it goes from 18 to 16% at the last cohort that I looked at. So the attempt was to show most recent group of 10th graders that we have like locked in, consistent data on their transcripts, and it comes out to 82 and 18. If we want to look at a graduating cohort, the numbers actually look worse. And we opted to go with the most recent group of kids that are moving through high school right now because maybe school systems have implemented some additional programming. So the attempt was not to skew the data, the attempt was to provide as clear data as possible. But we can present the data however folks want if you have additional feedback or additional slides you want us to show.
No, I just think it's important to be noted when we come out and talk about statistics, as if this is the final statistics. And I actually ran our own data as far as our system is concerned. There were approximately 62% entering college for the first year, and approximately 58 or 60% of those students had declared for the TOPS pathway in their junior and senior year. I went back to their sophomore year, it was close to the 75 to 80%, which is referenced here. When additionally, and also using clearinghouse data, determine how long the students have been through their second year, it was a much higher percentage. So just want to note that for the good of the group and for the good of the audience that may be viewing, that the data that's represented and told prior to implementation of initiative or proposal means a lot. So, just to consider that in the future.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's also important that we really take a look at the purpose of high school, all high schools, because I always preach, I want to prepare you for your chosen future, not the future that I think you should have, but whatever future you would like to have. So if my kids wanted to go to the military, I made sure and I prepared them to go to the military. If my kids wanted to go directly to the workforce, I prepared them to go directly to the workforce. So I think those numbers are not reflected in the data to show that what percentage of kids that say, hey, look, I don't want to go to college. I don't want to go into the workforce. I want to go serve my country. I think that is considered success for a high school if we allow kids to go to their chosen path.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and we've mulled over this data for a long time. I think the data are accurate, and I think that I don't disagree, right? Like, the purpose of high school is to prepare young people for whatever their next thing is, whether it's college, career, service of military, clergy, whatever that might be. But I think that when we get into what percent of young people are going to the military, right, it doesn't change this percentage too much. We still have a delta. We still have a disconnect between the number of kids that say or declaring they're going to university and then are ultimately successful in university, and the percent of young people who are entering the workforce right out of high school, and whether they got a credential that's going to help them or whether they were on a career pathway. So I completely agree with you, and as with all rolled up data on a bunch of different systems, mileage will vary on these data. Some school systems do have half their kids on career pathways, but that also means that some school systems have far less than 18% of their young people on career pathways. So like, this is not, we didn't pull individual school systems data to point fingers in any way. We pulled data on the 700,000 kids that are in public education in Louisiana, and your data could look different. And much of this data is actually available on the department website if you want to go and dig in and look at your college persistence data.
Thomas, that 42%, I'm assuming that number has declined over the past several years. Was that number significantly higher than 42% 3 or 4 years ago or something? Is
Our
42% pretty consistent over the last several
Our
years?
college persistence data doesn't go back that far. I mean, I think that it might go back like 3 years. So when you go back 3 years, your persistence actually isn't 3 years back. So, but this is 2 data points don't make a trend really.
Right.
But this is roughly what it's been.
I was just, I was curious in that, and I think you also got to consider some other factors that are involved other than just the education we're supplying kids. Tom's opportunity has made an opportunity for more kids to be eligible to go to college. With us pushing the ACT in the last several years, that has made a greater opportunity for more kids to be available to go to college. So I don't know that I necessarily agree completely with the fact that the education we're providing to kids is what the fault is for them not persisting in college. Some universities are harder than others, some kids aren't ready. And I do think one thing in our case, we have a lot of kids that do get dual enrollment. That puts them entering college at 17 years old, and they're not ready to go to on a college campus with some of the other distractions that are available on college campus at 17 years old, already having a year's worth of credits accumulated. I think that hinders kids sometimes. You got to grow up at some point in time, and sometimes a lot of difference between a 17-year-old kid and a 19-year-old kid.
Yeah, and the data we think is illustrative, right? It tells you that there is a challenge, right?
Right.
How big is that challenge? We can debate, right? Like how big is the issue? I don't know how you look at the data and don't say, well, we've got a challenge that we need to solve somehow, right? So we're going to try to keep this moving a little bit.
Sure.
The 18% of students who are on a career pathway, we went and looked at what types of credentials are they getting. And the high level is, and we can debate whether this credential should be an advanced credential or whether it should be a basic credential or a low basic credential or an advanced, but I don't think that it changes the story too much. And we have heard feedback that we need to look at some of these credentials and make sure they're in the right area. But it shouldn't change this story too much. 6% of young people are getting an advanced, high-quality career credential when they're exiting high school. 36% are receiving a really low-level credential, and 57% are receiving a basic quality credential. Now, how big of a difference do you think it would be if we move this credential from the bottom to the middle? I don't think that it changes the story too much, in that only 6% of our young people that are on a career pathway are getting a really good quality credential. So we've got a very small set of kids that are going for a career credential, and that would assume that they're like the discerned group of kids that really want to be on a career path. But only 6% of them are earning a high quality credential, and 36% of them are receiving a really low quality credential. And don't want to mull on this too much, because I imagine that as we increase the number of kids on the career path, help them select it, you will see the 6% actually go up. As you have more kids on the pathway, you can identify more pathways to get more kids credentials that resonate in their life. But it's all kids, right? We want to talk about career kids, we want to talk about Topps University kids, we want to talk about kids that don't know which one they want to do. So we looked at all kids that graduated, what percent of them got an advanced credential, and on the 4-year university path, that would be a 3 or better on the AP exam. And we see that 16% of our students are doing that. 16% of our graduates are doing that. But the troubling thing is, it looks very different when you look at subgroups. 16% of all students, but 9% of economically disadvantaged students, 6% of African American students, and 24% of white students. And right now, the purpose of a high school accountability or a school accountability system, in addition to all the other things we've talked about, is we're required to have one. We're required to have one for all of our Title I dollars. And one of the things it's supposed to do is highlight places where there are subgroup challenges, where subgroups are getting less than other subgroups. And right now that's not happening, because in the strength of diploma, everybody's graduation rate is sufficiently high that it's masking this thing that we think is very important, and you never see that the economically disadvantaged or the African American subgroup or students with disabilities actually are getting far less quality credentials in school. So we think that all of these things together tell us that we have access issues, we have quality of credential issues, and we've got young people that aren't selecting the pathway that they're ultimately going to be on when they exit high school, which translates to me that their outcome is suboptimal. Like, they are not getting the thing that is best for them. There are probably a million reasons why. But one reason that we've identified is the incentives in the accountability formula and the measurement in the accountability formula. Any reactions to these data?
I did want to share something about the data. When I think of K-8 framing, we are on the growth to mastery scale. Like, our goal is for our students to perform mastery or advanced. So if you're performing at mastery and advanced level, in your mind as a child, I'm going to college. So when they do enter high school, with that 82% of students saying that they're on a 4-year college plan, it's because, you know, that growth to that mastery advanced has been instilled in them. They want to go to college. I think there's a problem within the data. Yes, you can see that clearly. However, how we're addressing it is only going to cause a bigger problem. If we're not intentional, if we don't look at the big picture of not just focusing on high school, but K-12, and then take time to really plan thoroughly how to address what the data is saying versus quickly trying to put a new scale in place that may cause more, that is going to cause a decline, and then you have to communicate that and things. So I do see the picture that the data is painting, however, the approach is going to create a bigger.
I'd love to unpack that with you. Send me an email and let's chat about it. The formula, we think, does a few things that are really good. It is going to give young people, it's going to incentivize giving young people access to the experience. If they want to go to college, schools are going to be maximally rewarded, or they're going to be rewarded for giving the student the experience of some college before they go and determine, this isn't the thing that I want to do right out of high school. And we think the same thing with the workforce piece. If they say that they want to go into the workforce, they get the opportunity to experience some workforce, have some work-based learning experiences, and earn high-quality credentials. And for the kids that don't know what they want to do, and don't know if they want to go to 4-year college or if they want to go into the workforce, you can give them that workforce experience and give them the dual enrollment experiences. And we think that all of those things are good. So I'd love to spend some time and unpack unintended consequences with you.
So can I ask one? I know I'm supposed to be chair, but I have to ask a few questions. So you mentioned equity and access. So when we look at many of our districts, and Louisiana is a pretty rural state, and when we look at some of our districts, I'll use as an example our friends in Tensas that may not necessarily have some of the things that are in Jefferson Parish in terms of programming and different options for children. How do we address those things so that all children have the opportunity to be able to have those advanced credentials?
Yeah, I think a couple things. It's a helpful question, and accountability systems are mostly a measure. They're mostly like a tool that you use to measure things. Louisiana has utilized its accountability system in the past as something to incentivize behaviors. If it wasn't something that was designed to incentivize behaviors, you would set a really high bar without any opportunities for growth. You would set a really high bar that doesn't change based off of factors that we know. As a measure, right, I don't know that you want the majority of the formula to differentiate for communities that don't have the programming available. Because ultimately, it's a measure of how well is the school system preparing the young person for the next thing. And if the community doesn't have the things to support it, You don't want to say your school system is an A because you don't have access to these resources. You want to be honest about the fact that because there is a lack of resources, we find ourselves in this situation. Now, what can we do to solve that challenge? And I think that part of the benefit of a transition timeline is it gives time to communicate that we need to make some shifts and we need to come together to identify some partnerships in order to not have our score go down and do really good stuff for kids that's going to help them and maybe help the community have more resources in the future. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
So it is, and I think you answered the question from the previous, several slides ago. So that means that we need a longer timeline to be able to identify those communities, those partnerships within each of our respective communities, because it will have a bigger impact on rural communities than it will with more, I hate to use the word urban, but that's the only one that comes to mind at the moment. Urban communities are those that have more resources. So that's going to be critically important, because otherwise you're going to perhaps potentially have districts that may be, that can become an F and stay in F because they don't have the resources, they don't have the access or equity there to be able to address those concerns. And they're going to be there in perpetuity because businesses are not going to go to communities where there are F schools. And it can potentially create equity issues, potentially create economic issues in each of those communities as well.
Yeah. I think there is a fine line between delaying to make sure that people have the time in order to create the programs, and equity is an important word, and there can be a lot of different perspectives from which you look at the equity question. And for me, the equity question can be, what is equitable for the community in terms of the letter grade drives business and all of those things, but also equity for the young person, right, who is graduating without the things that they need in order to be successful. And how do you balance the equity here and the equity here? I think the answer is not to delay for a long period of time. It is that sweet spot of the right amount of time to build the programming, but also recognize that the school system didn't become an F. The accountability measure changed, but we do think that the measure is the right measure. So the school system is whatever that grade is in the future. So unless we think that the incentives are wrong, that we think that these are not the things that young people need, which we're going to get into in just a second. So you've all seen this before. Mastery rates look very similar, elementary school and high school, but far more high schools are in A or B. So we agree high school.
Mr. Lambert, if you don't mind, pause. And I've seen obviously the slide many times as well. Once again, just for the general public, elementary schools are judged much differently. And the outcome of an elementary school is much different than a high school. So once again, the data that's presented paints a picture when I don't think necessarily it's the accurate picture.
I think that it is actually accurate to say that 70% of high schools are in A or B right now, and 41% of elementary schools are in A or B. The next slide provides some additional context.
But what I think is inaccurate when we say significantly more high schools are rated A and B under the context that they're both rated the same based on the achievement on these tests. That's a misrepresentation, in my opinion, of this particular slide. Thank you.
So high school and elementary school are different. Both need to prepare young people for what happens after high school, after they leave that school. In elementary schools, we do that mostly based off of how the students perform on annual state tests, and then 25%, give or take, goes toward growth or progress toward mastery, in addition to school quality measures, etc. In high school, that measure looks different. Performance on assessments taken mostly in their first 2 years of high school. That's not completely accurate, but mostly in the first 2 years of high school. College and career readiness is measured on the ACT tests, whether it's work keys or the traditional ACT, the percent of students graduating on time, and then lastly, whether students are earning credentials that will benefit them after high school. do these feel like the right things to measure high schools based off of? Are there things missing? Are there things that shouldn't be measured? Forgetting whatever the requirements are, right? What, like, just from your heart of hearts as an educator, what's missing? What shouldn't be there?
I think we've talked about these at several of our convenings, and I don't want to go back through all of those and some of those suggestions that we offered, but you know, there's some sentiment, I think, that our current assessment, our LEAP assessments, aren't necessarily the greatest or best indicator of future success in college, and you know, but it's required, obviously, to assess your ability to graduate or pass a course, so to speak. That's one concern. The other is that, you know, the ACT, I guess, let me back up. I think we feel like the ACT is a better indicator of college success than the EOCs. So, and you and I have talked about this, about potentially looking at an ACT growth measure. You know, obviously that requires some resources to offer Aspire an ACT aligned assessment early on. I think, speaking for me and no one else, our system has already begun to do that and would embrace that moving forward. I think these are mostly the right measures, with the addition of considering students with disabilities, and I have 33 students, and really looking at the programming that provides opportunities for a handful of our most needy kids that we don't give any credit for, or point value, if you will, in the accountability system, but that provides a life-changing opportunity for our students. And that's just, I know that's, those are outliers, and sometimes it's hard to create a system that addresses all. Once again, I think maybe the tragedy in the whole this situation is that we do our best to individualize or differentiate for students as schools, but the system overall does not really differentiate based upon where, you know, what your school size is or where your community lies. And so, and it's unfortunate. I don't know anyone else anywhere that does a truly differentiated accountability scale. Maybe there are some out there, but that's something I just ask us to consider. Putting an eye toward some of those student groups that are a lot of times not reflected in the whole system.
Mr. James?
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to add a comment. I'm not going backwards here, but I know we're talking about rationale for all of this. It's really what we're trying to say. Is why do we want to change, and what are the things that we want to change? What's the data, and what's the story, and what are the evidence out there that we need to change? And one thing that we keep talking about is that high school letter grades are higher than other letter grades. Well, quite frankly, because I would think that phenomenon would probably exist in most districts. Primary school, middle school letter grades might be a little higher than primary school letter grades. High school letter grades might be a little, I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing in our school districts. It's the body of work. It's taking a child, a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, wherever they are. And we're measuring them along the way, but we're continuing to add progress to those measurements. Your slide at 35%, 37%, to say that it's not a big change, there's a couple of things that I would like to just reference there. Maybe I'm wrong. 2% of all the students in Louisiana, that's a fairly large number of students. I'm guessing that those percentages are representative of all the students in Louisiana. So that's a lot of kids, you know, when you think about that. And it also doesn't include maybe those students who were approaching basic and are now basic. So what is that total movement that sort of drives that portion of the high school academic index that's driving those letter grades higher? I don't want our high schools to be the same as our middle schools. I want to see continued progress as kids make progress in school. So I just say that to say this. I'm not convinced that we shouldn't be doing things different in some places. So back to your original comment, I understand that we need to continue to find ways to serve our students better and and identify what those indicators are. But I'm not sure that a rationale for changing the high school performance score is because high schools have better letter grades than middle schools or primary schools. I'm thinking, intuitively, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I would kind of think that that's what we would all want to see.
Yeah, the intent here was to put together a bunch of data points that, based off what we've heard, high schools and elementary schools are doing two different things even though they have the same spirit. Whatever that thing is preparing them for the next thing. Elementary schools and middle schools are trying to prepare the young person to have all of the options available to them when they get to high school. Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to career? Are you not sure? You want all the doors open. High school, you've got 4 years to help that young person exit high school with a diploma and whatever they need in order to do the next thing that they, their family, and their counselor work together to select. And what we tried to do was pull together data that tells you, are young people prepared at doing the things that we say we're preparing them to do? So we said that we were preparing 82% of young people to go to a 4-year university. 56% of young people actually enroll in 4-year university. 42% are still there a year later. That checks one box for me, that maybe we're not reaching every child, right? And then we look at the distribution of kids that are earning high quality credentials versus low versus medium quality credentials, and the high quality credential number is too low and the poor quality credential is too high. So then you go, okay, well, we're not quite meeting everybody there. And then you go, well, so we're not doing that, but our LEAP scores are 2 percentage points higher, which might be meaningful depending on your perspective. There's also added nuance to that Jumpstart students don't take the geometry exam, which could account for 1 or 2%. But I think the point is that the rationale isn't that high school scores don't match elementary schools. It's that high school, the data that we're seeing doesn't tell us that if you believe that the goal is to prepare young people for the thing that comes after that school experience, you could believe that elementary school should be higher. You could believe that. What I don't think that we believe is that high school scores should be higher. I do believe that these data tell us that we might not be doing as good of a job as 70% A and B would tell us based off the outcomes of what's happening to kids after they graduate from high school. How far off it is, I think that we can talk about. But I don't know how the data that we just looked at together, we can say everything's okay and 70% of our high schools are an A or B. I just don't know how we do that. But if we need to look at more data, let's do it.
No, in full respect to what you just said, I don't think anybody sitting in this room is sitting, will ever sit here and say that everything's just okay.
Okay.
So I think we're all talking about groups here that we're all looking for ways that we can do things better. I think this conversation began some time ago with the premise that high school's letter grades are too high. And I'm not sure that is the right horse rabbit to chase here. So as long as that is, if we can get off that topic and really dig into the topics around, we're not worried about the letter grade of high schools, we're worried about the outcomes of high schools, and did primary and middle actually support those outcomes, then I think, we're close to almost saying the same thing, but I still don't think we're saying the same thing.
I had a comment as well. Based on the data, are we saying that if a student is not successful at the college level, that we are not a successful high school?
No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that, do we believe that the purpose of high school is, in a really simple way, to prepare the young person for the next thing? Whatever that next thing is. Is that a fair, quick, thing that we're going to test a hypothesis on? The purpose of high school is to prepare that young person for whatever their next thing is that they pick. So, I'm sorry.
Just a few comments here, piggybacking on what David said, and Ken over here, and quite a few other people. If we're going to have a true educational discussion of what we all feel is important to offer in high school and to do the right thing for kids. We have, in my opinion, started the whole thing off wrong with the type of slide, if you go back to that 35, 37, and 41, and 70, with the AV high schools. Out in the media now, it becomes this flashpoint that all high schools are overrated in the state because of this one indicator, which starts a discussion in a very negative way among people who are doing this work. The accountability formula that was derived, that we currently exist with, that went through years of development from prior administration with educators, with some of the same people who are in the media blasting. That accountability formula is what all schools responded to in the state of Louisiana. What everyone felt at the time were the best indicators to measure a high school program. And to say now that to use this one indicator as the flashpoint to, I guess, get everyone all excited about making this major change is really an unfair way to start a discussion. Now, when I look at this particular slide and I see elementary at 35% scoring mastery or advanced, and the high school at 37, whether we want to quibble over who took geometry, how many percentage points that goes up with. And you look at then these four elements that you put in on slide 36, and then I look at this particular slide, I don't see the correlation at all in the proposal. Of the four indicators, if we're having a discussion on what's important, I think nationwide, the foremost indicator of people's accountability program has to do with cohort graduation rates for high school. That's got to be a prominent piece in everybody's accountability formula. The Fed says that's even an academic indicator, which I didn't realize, an assessment type indicator. That is their most important measure to begin with. Then we're having a major discussion around the strength of diploma index, or whatever we're going to call it now. How do we get a kid ready? And we're looking at a major shift right now to plan programs to develop partnerships with industry into full apprenticeship programs, increasing dual enrollment credit, looking at associate degrees. And by the way, to do an associate degree, everybody knows here that it takes 60 credit hours to get an associate degree, which is roughly 20 courses. And if you look at high school, they don't just start those in their junior and senior year. If they don't start on that track in their freshman year, they'll never amass 20 credits unless they go every summer, but that's a side note. So if we're saying now that the strength of diploma index, or whatever we're calling it, is again the most important. And when we look at these four things, you know, I would put those two as the most important. The kids who, the percentage who graduate, and how we're preparing them for life after high school. What credential are they coming out with? Yet when I look at this, it seems like we're putting the most important, by putting 40% of a proposed score on these LEAP 2025 tests that we all have an issue with in many different ways, one of which, that we've had these discussions, they don't correlate that well with the ACT, which is what we're trying to prepare kids to take so that they will gain college scholarship money and TOPS money to go to high school. So increasing a 9th and 10th grade LEAP 2025 weight to me is counterintuitive to what we're all saying is the main focus of the high school. Because once we get that kid in, 35% of the kids, by your stats, are entering high school scoring mastery or advanced on those tests. So then should our focus then be, as high schools, well, my goodness, 40% of our score is going to be on how well they do in those 9th and 10th grade tests. Let's throw all of our resources into taking the other 65% and get them to those top 2 levels, or the growth significant enough on it to get that 20%. Or do we put a lot of our energies into doing what we think the new focus should be at the high school, which is graduating children or students with a diploma that is meaningful with the proper credentials? So looking at those 3 slides and trying to have in my own mind, trying to be open enough to see what is our focus and what should a high school be doing. To me, of those 4 things that you put down there, the bottom 2, you want to go back 1 slide for me, please? The bottom 2 are going to be most important. That's going to be the largest work of what we should be doing at a high school. And then the second bullet, and to me, that first bullet last, should be the least that we should be putting all of our efforts into. Yet with the proposed percentages, we're making it the most important of the 4 indicators. So I have a little problem, I guess, with myself in terms of how then do we approach this with our teachers, with our educators, with our principals, with our community. What are we telling our parents? What are the parents telling us are the most important things? And when we've had our focus groups, the most important things, God, I want them to graduate, and I want them to graduate with something that's meaningful. And I think we can all agree on that. And I would like to see, if we're going to look at these 4 indicators, a more robust discussion on how we would weight each one of these indicators. And I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop, because we haven't hit the strength of diploma yet. When you're looking at, I know I had this discussion with y'all when we did our group meetings. When we look at AP courses and dual enrollment courses, we've got to account for schools that offer both programs. Because for many of our kids, those who are going out of state, taking AP courses, maybe they look at it as better for them because that's more recognizable across the country. Those who are staying in state, a dual enrollment may be more important because they're going to go to a college within Louisiana. So when we look at awarding points on that, there should be a combination. And I guess that's just kind of in the detail. We I think have to look at how do we combine the 2, because our kids will do both. But anyway, this particular slide and the next one that you're showing, I really think we should think very carefully how we would weight these indices. And if we feel that graduating kids and the strength of diploma that are graduating are the 2 most important ones, to me they should carry the most weight. And personally, I think the LEAP 2025 takes our attention away from those final outcomes. And I think they should carry the least amount of weight.
Thank you, Superintendent Boccia. I think that's helpful. It leads into the discussion that I wanted to have with folks. I think that when you think about what, like, the purpose of high school is to prepare kids for what's next, and I think that when you ask an adult, what do you expect of a high school, an employer, what do you expect of a high school graduate? I'm curious what you would say that an employer would tell you they expect of a high school graduate.
I can answer that. We recently had business, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No,
From our version of just meeting with business and industry reps, they don't often reference grades, ACT, what they reference is a student that has the perseverance, the ability to overcome, to adapt, be on time, understand how, how important work is. Those are the things that we reference. Smaller competencies, more so than an ACT score, a dual enrollment credit, or certification. By far and away, those are the most things that are referenced when you talk to business and industry reps, specifically with that question.
Yeah, I think that I would, The thing that I would add to that list, because I don't actually disagree with you at all, is that, and I think that no one said it because it's just assumed to be true, is a basic level of literacy and numeracy. And at 40%, 37%, there are more kids than that are at a basic level of literacy and numeracy. But I think that I would challenge that that journey ends when the kid gets to high school. The high school has time with that young person to help build their literacy and numeracy. So one of the things that this proposal does is it weights this in an interesting way. When we think about the high school assessments being the first 2 years, it tries to weight the first 2 years at 20% for your assessment index, 20% for growth, right? So that's 40%. 5% is the experiences that kids are getting, and then, so that's the first half of high school. And then the second half of high school, it seeks to focus in on graduation rate, strength of diploma, and ACT, and actually weights the second half of high school slightly more than the first half of high school, because the journey to literacy and numeracy doesn't end at the end of 8th grade. 9th, 10th, and 11th grade are really important years, and the ACT measures literacy and numeracy in addition to other things. The LEAP 2025s measure that, ability to engage with scientific information, and ability to engage with historical information. So I wanted to just say that as we frame this conversation around, like, do these weights feel completely off? Are they close, directionally right? I heard somebody say that they think the ACT should be weighted some more. Curious what folks around the table think.
Thomas, let me ask something. Currently, when we graduate a kid on time, would we get 100 points for that?
You get the graduation rate, 100 points. It's more complicated than that,
Right.
yeah.
Because I know the people in my area have said, the 150 is going down to 100, but the graduating kids on time is going to come from 100 to a 0. So there was concern about that, not getting anything for graduating a kid on time.
So we're going to get to that slide in just a minute. Any thoughts here on percentages, weights?
Go ahead. I do want to point something as Doris said, and actually Mr. Corley had referenced it as well, and that is with the ACT. When you consider, I believe, almost 68% of our students in the state of Louisiana are economically disadvantaged, and the ACT provides an opportunity, an equitable opportunity for our parents and for our families. We talk about providing equitable opportunities for our students with a strategic focus for those students before they graduate high school, then why aren't we truly focusing on ACT? And I've heard you reference, Ms. Lambert, often that you feel ELA is more correlated to ACT and math, or math is more correlated, and you feel our standards currently are. I still haven't seen the data to support that. Personally, I don't feel that way if we're concentrating on LEAP 2025, which I believe truly for our elementary schools to focus on those things. And you're right, literacy doesn't end at 9th grade or 10th grade, but I'll tell you what, and you can probably ask any literacy expert, it's a lot harder to repair the lack of academic knowledge relative to literacy and literacy development in 9th, 10th, and 11th or 12th grade than it is for K through 8. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but from that standpoint, why sometimes we feel like we're fighting a double sword for our students, and we talk about opportunities and throw in the whole social studies piece where the test isn't aligned, we don't have the curriculum resources, we continue to be evaluated and judged on the outcome of the social studies assessments, knowing that it's not accurate or we don't have the resources, yet we're still held accountable for those things. And with the ESSA guidelines, that we don't necessarily have to have 2 different sets of assessments, we could potentially use the ACT. And these are just discussions that we've had internally, and I realize it will be a ton of work, but to me, naturally, when you look at these percentages, the ACT should be weighted more for equal access and opportunity for our students, a stronger focus for our high school curriculum as well, more so than LEAP 2025.
I also had a comment about the assessment index. With it going up, could we consider adding points for students who retest? Because right now we aren't getting any points for retesters.
We've heard feedback on that, and that's included in the feedback we've gotten. That's complicated, but we can look at other places to include it. I don't know that you could include it in the assessment index, but you might be able to include it other places, so we're looking into that. Okay. So, most of this is covered on the next slide, so we're just gonna go into it. So, this table reflects the what we're describing as the College and Career Acceleration Index, because we've heard feedback from folks that it's not a strength of diploma index anymore, and it really wasn't a strength of diploma index before. It was a graduation rate with some additional points if you got a kid a credential. So shifting to a College and Career Acceleration Index, we do like to think that it offers some differentiation of students who enter high school in a different posture as far as their readiness for the next step. You'll see that on the right in that purple box. For students who enter high school below basic in both ELA and math, we know that it is less likely for that young person to graduate from high school. We presented data on that in the past to the Accountability Council and maybe to this group. So we would include a 25-point floor for those students, so you would not earn no points for them graduating in this index. You would actually get 25, which gives you a little bit of a bump. If you think about these two indices, the strength of diploma, or the College and Career Acceleration and the graduation rate, you're getting 25 points as a floor and actually getting more points for that graduate than you would get for another person who graduated that entered high school ready or at basic. So there's a floor of 25 points for students who enter below basic, and then 10 points for students who enter below basic on one of those two tests. Then we go over to the actual table that you see in front of you, where this index only looks at graduates, and if a student graduates but does not earn a credential, because this is a credential attainment index, the school will receive no points for that student unless they fell into that other category, being below basic on ELA. For that student, you get 25. And then you go to the next tier, which is essentially the old 110 category, where you would get 50 points for that. And then a category above that, which would get you 75, 100 above that, and 125 above that. As we get into the conversation, I already can predict one of the things that's going to be said, so I'm going to frame the 125. When we think about the rigor of this index, right? We want the rigor of this index to match the rigor of K-8's indices, right? We don't want any of our indices to be easier for high school or elementary school. They are measuring two different things, but we want them equally rigorous and good for kids. When you think about your assessment index, I want you to think about what percent of your kids you are earning the 150 for right now in the assessment index. And that number will vary by school system. It'll be somewhere between 4 and 8% probably. So I want you to think about this in terms of the percent of your kids that score advanced, the percent of your kids that score mastery, and the percent of your kids that score basic. And then with that frame, say, would my numbers bear out similarly on this index if this was implemented? And if the answer to that is yes, then it's equally rigorous. If the answer to that is no, even after implementing everything, then it's more rigorous, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. So, starting the conversation here.
Mr. Chairman? Correct me if I'm wrong, so you're saying that anyone that graduates, just a normal graduate, that's in the graduation cohort, right? I would ask, could we please remove 0 for graduates who fail to fall in, if it's a strength of diploma or a college career acceleration, and we're saying this is in addition to, I think it sends a negative. I think the message here is if you graduate without any of these, you're going to get a 0 in this category, and it's going to be factored in. But what we're saying is, no, it's not going to be factored in. You're going to actually be awarded, those graduates are going to be awarded points in the graduation cohort. Correct?
But you're still going to get a 0 in this index for that student. Otherwise, you would take them out of the denominator, and there would be no penalty, there would only be reward, so it wouldn't work. Everybody would be perfect, your score would definitionally be perfect, or not exist. So if you had one kid, based on what you're describing, if you had one kid who graduated with a credential, and you had 99 kids who graduated without a credential, you would only have one kid in this index, and let's say that they earned 100 level, you'd get 100 for that index. So you would be incentivized to not put kids in to these credentialing programs if they're gonna earn a lower level credential. So did that explanation make sense?
Yes, but I thought we were told that those kids, because of the graduation cohort, captures those kids for graduating, but here, it's actually factored.
Yes, you're getting points for that student graduating in a different index. This index measures something different.
So, just for clarity here, I have a high school graduate that graduates with a long list of honors courses, a weighted GPA of 4.5, 29 on their ACT, accepted into, I don't know, university.
Western State.
Somewhere. There you go. Accepted an opportunity to go to a multiple of universities, from LSU to Vanderbilt to wherever, whatever you want to say. This graduate gets 0.
If they did not earn a requisite number of dual enrollments or AP credits or industry-based credential.
So this particular graduate is focused on high school, connected to family, great high school student, in high school to prepare and get as many honors courses and go as far as high school offerings can go. Calculus, English 4, wherever they want to go. Not really interested in taking AP because students can choose to take AP or not. In other words, they want to go enter the university and they got their plan. They have no desire to enter the university with an accelerated path or whatever. And we got a lot of kids that, I was a math teacher, and they would go, back in the day when I was teaching, I taught calculus. And they come back celebrating that they placed out of calculus but still want to take calculus because they want to take calculus at the university level and begin understanding it at that level before they start risking upper level calculus courses at the university level.
So what I'm
just let me finish. I have my own children who are family members that, quite frankly, one's an attorney in DC and another a chemical engineer. They would have both earned 0. But they were quite prepared for their university experiences and did very well. So I'm just not sure, although I think that this has merit in awarding, giving high schools credit and students credit for pursuing this. You use the word penalized. This does penalize a quality diploma that accomplishes the purpose of high school. And again, it penalizes.
So what I think I'm hearing is you would propose that we would develop some kind of indicator that a school prepared a kid for college, and as a result, they wouldn't have to earn additional credentials because they had been, by some objective measure, prepared well. And I heard you say ACT score, GPA is a little bit squishier, but we can talk through that. But
yeah, well, this assumes that college preparation must include AP and dual enrollment. And I'm not necessarily convinced that that hypothesis is accurate. So certainly I'm not going to disparage the fact that 12 dual enrollment credits and 3 or 4 AP, I have to be honest, both of my children did take AP tests, neither one of which was useful to them when they moved into college. So, and they took AP tests because I was the principal of the high school. And it gave us bonus points. And they were going to get our bonus points, right? So I'm just saying this incentivizes things that might not be necessarily important to families and students?
Yeah, I think it's important to think about all of these cases and come up with solutions to make sure that we're not incentivizing the wrong behaviors, pushing people to get points when kids are not benefiting from it. And to directly respond to why I use the word penalize is that it is an accountability system. And if it didn't have a plus and a minus, right, you would have nothing but perfect scores. So like, maybe I could have chosen that word more carefully. I thought I was amongst friends. Thank you. But I don't know how a better way to describe it. It is an accountability system.
I think you describe it accurately. It does penalize, and my question is, do we want to penalize that graduate?
Yeah, and I don't want to call them an edge case, but they are a relatively small percentage of our ultimate graduates who are in the bucket that you described, in that like 28 on the ACT, right? But like, we do need to solve for every different student in every different position to make sure that the right outcome is available as something that the school can get points for if they do really well by that kid. In terms of
my last comment to that bucket you're saying is small. I do agree with you. It probably is small this day and age, because people like me and principals that push kids in, and these are cooperative kids, or great kids, or families and everything. All right, I'll go ahead and do it. I'm interested in art, I'll take the art AP test, but I'm not going to do anything with that. I'll go take the dual enrollment course, but I'm going out of state to school. So the bucket is low because of the influence that principals have over, families and students in that partnership, but they're helping us play a game around the accountability system, and I think that we don't want that. We want some authentic decisions made in high school to go to the next step.
I hope this makes y'all laugh too. Game on my bingo card, I just got one. Made sense. Okay.
So just on the college career acceleration piece, I think this is probably the place for consideration for students with disabilities or Act 833 when something great is happening in your system, whether that be some type of state approval process so that we have this program that's been approved by the state based upon some rubric or metrics. When a student with disabilities finishes with, whatever competencies through that program that's been recognized and they would achieve, and I think that's a problem with our current system because it doesn't recognize that. So I hope we'd have some conversation with the work group around that.
Our college career readiness team, Jessica Bellalongo, is working with some folks that know a lot about 833 and workforce and identifying a path forward there. And we are working with the group of folks that folks have given to us to establish a meeting date to get together and talk about the Leap Connect 1 to 2% population.
Thank you.
I have a question. Now, I apologize if I missed it, but how does changing the strength of diploma positively impacts the data that was presented on slide 35 with the 35% elementary students scoring mastery, the 37% high school, the 41% elementary schools being A and B, 70% of high schools? Like, how does that data connects to changing the strength of the diploma?
Sure. At the last SAC meeting, we presented some slides around how all of these indices kind of fit together to cause the high school scores to be higher than the elementary school scores. And the primary driver there is the graduation rate index is much higher than the elementary school other indices. Now, but the high school assessment index is about the same as the elementary school. The way that it all kind of fits together is the formula currently mostly incentivizes on-time 4-year graduation. And I think Superintendent Corley said something that just piqued in my mind, that like right now, the accountability system doesn't recognize when a school system does a really good job with a student with significant disabilities. It does incentivize getting them a 4-year diploma, whether or not that 4-year diploma is going to be something that really helps them in the long term. So I think that's true across the board. When you look at the data and see students who haven't scored proficient, they're not even close to proficiency, and they're on a 4-year university pathway. So this starts to create a set of a measurement that essentially says, what path is a student going to be best equipped after high school for? And then school systems have to identify with that family what path, and then the school earns points when the kid is going to ultimately earn points down the road. Does that help?
Yes, so looking at that, with that being said, and thinking about equity, as Mr. Jenkins was mentioning, what if the district don't have the resources to provide all of those opportunities to the students? Then how would that impact them on the scale?
Yeah, I think that to use the same word, equity, I don't think that it would be equitable for that kid to say that because your school system didn't have the resources, we've lowered the expectation on the school system to give you the thing that you need. Because I don't think, while the type of credential that is relevant in a particular community changes, there still need to be really rigorous, robust, high-quality things to help them with whatever the next thing is. So regardless of the resource constraint, we still should expect that kids, regardless of where they live in the state, are all receiving, if the school's an A, that means that that kid got what that kid needs in order to thrive after high school. And I don't think that really changes based off rural or urban. The thing that changes is what that path is, but we shouldn't say that rural kids need less of credentials because the school system has less resources. The equity thing hasn't changed for the kid. All that's changing is how we're measuring the school, which might be giving a misrepresentation of how that school's doing. And the conversation won't happen around the resource constraint because it's like, we're an A or we're a B. Things look fine, but things aren't fine for the kid. I don't know if that's helpful.
So conversely of that, if I said geographically where I don't have the resources, and financially where I don't have the resources, where I can't supply the kids the opportunities that other districts can supply, then I shouldn't be in that, even though we're doing everything we possibly can for the child. So because geographically, and I'm speaking for Clayton Parish, we're a rural district. I'm about 88% economically disadvantaged. We do offer dual enrollment opportunities. 84% of the ones entering college, 84% of my kids don't qualify for dual enrollment. And I don't think 84% of anybody's qualified for dual enrollment. If a kid gets a dual enrollment credit in Clayton Parish, it's paid for by Clayton Parish. If we didn't pay for it, they wouldn't qualify to get in. So we offer those opportunities for children, but there's not a university close enough they can travel to. There's not a technical school close enough that they can travel to. We provide the transportation to technical schools. So we're that particular, I think it's the next slide, I think there is some equity issues in it, in the fact that it's a, you gotta find it. That slide is a value table. We're telling kids that they're valued, and I appreciate the comments that Dr. Temple made when she started here, that every kid ought to be valued. And I mean, I'm going in my 32nd year of education, and we're all in the kid business. So every child should have some value. Now, I certainly appreciate the comments that David made on kids that are as successful as they are and graduate and have no credit. I have kids that when they graduate, they're celebrated. I mean, and kids have different situations that occurs. You know, if we're able to overcome those situations, whether family or whatever the situations are, a kid graduating high school in Clayton Parish, in some instances, is something that should be valued more than 0 points. Now I'm speaking for Clayton Parish. But this creates an equity issue for me. I don't have the financial resources, or I don't have the resources close enough geographically to provide my kids the same opportunities that other districts do. I don't have the finances to. So to get, and I have kids that can get those 12 dual enrollment credits. We're paying for those. Now, if there would be some financial piece that goes along with this to help, that would certainly help to level the playing field in my situation. Secondly, I think that this creates, and I think you touched on it, Thomas, and I think you agree with it, there are some basic Jumpstart credentials that are valued at 50 points that I feel should carry more value. And we talked about this, to where I had a child that has successfully completed the technical school by traveling there last year on our dime, taking the classes. He is completing a welding certificate. Now, he has not got to the technical diploma, which would be the advanced, which would put him up there at 100. He just has a basic Jumpstart credential, and in our world, that kid can go to work today, okay? And he's worth 50 points. I had 3 that graduated with a associate's degree. Okay, those kids get 160 points today on the scale, or they get 125 on the new scale, and they can't go to work today. But this kid is valued at 50 points, and these are valued at 125, and I just don't feel that that's equitable for those children. Now, that particular IBC that he got, should it be 125 points? I'm not saying that, but I think it's certainly worth more than 50 points. We also send kids in CNA program. We did a Jumpstart summer where kids were successful in completing CNA. They're going to go into patient care technician, which opens some different varieties. That's to be a phlebotomist, EKG, etc. That's still only worth 50 points as a basic Jumpstart credential. So I think we've had the conversation. I do believe there's some credential more than 50 points. And I hope the work group will take that into consideration and look at those credentials, that if we're going to value children and we're going to value what they're receiving is something that is valuable to them when they step across that stage and go to work, they ought to be more than 50 points on the scale number.
Yeah, we are working through that. You'll notice there's an intermediate credential held in that 75-point category, and we're having discussions right now about what credentials might be bundled together, and CNA, phlebotomy, patient care tech. I'm going to get all the lingo wrong, but that was one of the ones that came up as could be an interesting portfolio of credentials that together are very valuable, and where they would fall in the scale. And same thing with your welding example. As we create an intermediate credential, there could be a world where that might be an intermediate credential, and then the next.
And I'm sure there are other credentials in different parts of the world. That's the 2 credentials we're able to offer our children through the technical school. That's the only 2 that they were able to offer to them, other than a business credential, which I don't think is near as valuable as one of those 2 in going to work in the real world. So other districts probably have like situations that I hope are looked at. I appreciate the fact that Explore those intermediate credentials is put in there. Is the time frame from right now to the BESI meeting, is that a allowable time frame to explore those credentials? That's a lot of work.
There will definitely be a framework presented of how it would happen going forward, and what that process will look like. Because right now there's a very, I guess, a binary, or either it's advanced or it's basic. We need to come up with a rubric for exactly how those things fit together. But yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this?
Just one thing, Mr. Lambert, is a reference to something Ms. Bochet said as well. As far as the dual enrollment credit and AP, I think a lot of us feel AP carries as much weight as our dual enrollment credits, and it's weighted much differently on this scale, and it's currently weighted. So, and over the last 3 to 5 years, through the leadership of the Department of Education, has really focused on Jumpstart and dual enrollment credits, and we've seen that transition. I know in our system, and probably most systems, a lot of systems that had the opportunity to do so. To see that weighted in a similar fashion and not putting AP on the pedestal, so to say, when in reality it's more valuable for a Louisiana graduate, who the majority of register in Louisiana colleges and universities, to put more weight to our dual enrollment credits.
That's feedback we've received, and we'll include in the report. Thank you. Okay, the next slide is just a real quick gut check on this. This was something that SAC previously had endorsed as a concept, and was in the previous proposal, but banding ACT with the thought that it would simplify things and help drive improvement in ACT scores, and align when schools get points with when students get scholarship money. The one shift that you'll note here is that the 17 is not for points. The points begin at 18, which is what the current formula does. Thoughts, feedback here? Do we think that a banded approach remains an appropriate approach or not?
What would you assign to each band?
The goal would be to make sure that it didn't change the results. So as close as possible, the index would come out with the same result as if it had not been banded. So it's not attempting to increase or decrease scores, it's attempting to band the scores in such a way that that nothing changes in the way that it's actually coming out, but instead takes away the incentive to focus on 1 point at a time when that 1 or 2 points might be 4 or 5 times where that kid takes that test, and they've already unlocked the amount of money that that family wants and needs.
I can't help but still go back to the point, and I know, Thomas, we've had the conversation, but just for my own sake of feeling good about leaving here today, a 17 gets this TOPS Texas money that a kid working through a Jump Start diploma on work keys is able to obtain silver, and they're able to receive that TOPS Tech money, which they can then go on and continue their education at the technical school that I've been driving them to, paying their tuition for, paying for their scrubs, paying for their books, paying for all that. That's big for a kid, and it's valued at 0 points. I mean, the 17 gives a kid money that can be life-changing, and we say that's worth no points.
We've got that feedback as well, and it will be included in the report.
I have a comment as well, question. How does this, looking at the strength of diploma index as well as this scale, how does this help or give hope to a failing school? These changes.
How does it give hope to a failing school? I mean, I think that, one, this is, I hope, attainable. I hope that nobody looks at this and goes, there's no way that my school system can be a success because we can't offer credentials. So I don't know how it doesn't offer hope to a school system. It is something that school systems can develop partnerships and identify a path for every single kid. I guess I need to understand more.
If I could piggyback off that comment, I think this is something that we discussed in Western, because we agreed that the number of students that would receive 0 points would be significantly greater than the number of students that would receive 125 points. Where's the hope for that failing school?
I guess my question is it's a good question to ask and think about, but at the end of the day, if the majority of your students are earning 0 points, is that a place where we should say, let's find a way to make the school score improve? Or is it a place where we should say, maybe that school isn't ready to earn an A, a B, a C, or a D? And I think that if almost all of your kids are graduating high school with no credential, that's a little bit challenging.
And I think it goes back to your premise that there are too many A and B schools in the state of Louisiana. And as this dialogue continues to progress, I think we're seeing that we're just not on the same page.
I thought that we had kind of come to a place where we had agreed that there were too many A or B, it was just how many too many A or B. Maybe I misread the room, but everybody acknowledged that we had a challenge. We don't? Okay.
Mr. Lambert, I think you listening to the superintendents, I think there's value in students earning a high school diploma. And the proposed career readiness indicator doesn't take account for that. And I think it's worth looking at. And at least investigating the fact that, hey, the purpose of high school, some kids will graduate without all of the bells and whistles of AP, CLEP, but I think that's still value in earning a high school diploma.
Thanks.
Mr. Lambert, I'm not sure I understood the last comment. I'll have to say, I've got to do more for my schools in Clay Parish. When I retire, get run off, or die, I'll still be saying that. I think we can always do a better job. So I'll acknowledge that we've got to do a better job. There are some things in this that I think need to change that will show that we're doing a better job, that we're making an effort to do a better job. I simply want to have the opportunity to be on the same playing field with others in the equity of the balance of those different things.
Yeah, I know how you come at this work. We spent a lot of time together.
I didn't understand. I mean, you asked the question, we make a slide and ask the question, did we not all agree between A's and B's? And I don't know that that was discussed earlier. I've got to do a better job with my schools, okay? Regardless of whether they're labeled as A, B, C, D, F, E, P, whatever. I've got to do a better job with them, and that regardless of what happens here, regardless of what Bessie does, I'm going to continue to do things to improve the quality of education we're doing for kids. So, but if I'm going to be compared to everybody else, I would like a fair shot at being compared. That's all I'm asking. So, and I did ask a question, and I'm going to stop. I asked a question a while ago about the timeline, okay? And that's one thing that I'm not opposed to changes. I think we have to do some changes. I don't want to be rushed into so quickly that we make changes, and then we have to turn around and make changes again. Change is hard. Constant change is impossible. So I asked a while ago about the time frame of getting this done to get back to Bessie by the August meeting. Just take the time and get it right, so that when we do have to make the changes, we don't have to just fight change after change after change. Just a suggestion.
This table was in the last SAC meeting. Won't spend a lot of time on it, but it essentially maps the points to the current strength of the diploma index as close as you can map them, because they're not exactly the same, but it kind of shows where the 160 becomes 125, the 150 becomes 101 case, 75 in another case, but wanted to let you know that's in here. And these slides were also in the previous SAC meeting, and are just kind of a simulation of how the strength of diploma index and the graduation rate are the highest of all of the indices. And when you put them together under this simulation, you wind up in a place where the strength of diploma, the graduation rate coupled together, the results look very similar to all of the other indices, which, whether you agree with what's being measured, you can at least see that they have a similar level of rigor. They are similarly, the score is similar, which you would hope that an elementary school and a high school would both have equally rigorous bars. So we're open to feedback on how rigorous and how to make that bar more rigorous. I heard some feedback on the ACT, increasing that. But ultimately, that is going to be, it would do something very similar. It might even decrease high school scores some more based off of what you're seeing on this slide. Real quick update on student growth. The study group had several goals around student growth. I'll go through them really quickly. They wanted to ensure the state's growth measure did not reward non-growth. They wanted to place additional focus on the lowest performing students in each school. They wanted to simplify our growth measure and make sure that it's accurately reflecting progress, and eventually get us to a place where it's possible for us to go to a vertical scale if we would like. And then resolving any of the concerns we have with the growth measure, they also want to make sure that we resolve the problem that no matter how much growth a student has in a school, the school will earn an F for the work they've done with that student until that student scores basic. So they want to identify a way to solve that challenge. So these were the recommendations that the study group gave. One was they asked the department to seek input into how we increase the rigor and improve the accuracy of our index. This could be a long-term thing for us to solve. Expressed interest in increasing the rate of growth in elementary schools so that a school that grows its students could reasonably be expected to grow 1 or more letter grades once that measure is strengthened. They expressed interest in recognizing exemplary growth for students who are least proficient by focusing any weight of the increase of growth on the students in the school that have the lowest scale scores, the lowest 25% of students in that school. And then lastly, they asked us to prioritize our ability to shift to a more intuitive growth measure, which could include a vertical scale. I want to really quickly just share some of the expert feedback thus far. We are still digging into this and working through this. It's going to be a long-term challenge for us to get to a place where we have a long-term solution, but we are confident we'll come up with some good short-term solutions imminently. They want us to increase the assessment information on the LEAP for lower performing students. That'll take a little bit longer to resolve. And they want us to examine potentially adjusting our growth model specifications in terms of both the covariates in the growth model and how we're awarding points by percentile. So I'm going to have 2 slides here that talk about some of the lower performing student information. We want to develop and include additional items for students, or to assess scale scores below 700 and balance our error measurement between the level 5 and the level 1 so that students who are in the unsatisfactory category of performance and students who are in the advanced category of performance have the same margin of error. And then lastly, we want to make sure that when we're doing this, we're working closely with the TAC, who are a bunch of psychometricians who help us think about how do we make sure that our measurement is good, make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences as we start to shift focus on the assessment. In the deep dive on our test, wanted to share some information that we have that's kind of informing our approach. On the English test, we have substantially less information in the area below 700, but we have really good information above 750. Very, very stable, which means that there is room for us to take questions from one category and move it to the lower categories and not really disturb much about the test. It would balance the test out really nicely, so we have a path forward there. On the math test, we have really, really, really strong precision in the basic and mastery categories. We don't have as much precision as we'd like in the advanced and in the unsatisfactory and approaching basic categories. So we are currently working through ways that we can solve all of that at the same time. Our assessment vendor has some really good items that we're exploring, including to better discern that, but it is going to be a challenge that we are going to have to work through and be really diligent and deliberate about.
So when you accomplish that and you feel like the test will be operational, will there be a period where it would be a pilot or a field test?
These items have been field tested, they just have not been included on our assessment yet. So they've been field tested by other states. And then the last little bit here, just to explain a little bit about what we're doing with the covariates and the percentile ranges. We're looking at each of our covariates. If you don't know this, every time that we have to take a variable out of our VAM, it takes us like 3 days in order to do that. So it's a long process to go through and do all of this analysis. But we're going through and removing each variable one at a time and seeing how closely correlated the things are. Because if we are overcorrecting for particular characteristics of students, that could be contributing to the problem. So we're looking at that. And then the last recommendation that they made was, instead of doing quintiles, perhaps do deciles in terms of how we award points. Right now, we just chunk it into 20, 20, 20, 20, and maybe I missed a 20. Did I get to 5?
We got you.
We got it. We're friends. We're all friends. Thanks, Will. You're the best. Get down to deciles potentially, which would allow us to create some differentiation. The concern that we have is if there might be like a disproportionate impact on schools and systems that have a lot of students who are below proficiency, because we know where that's where the challenge is in the measurement. So we want to make certain that whatever we do right now, if we're able to fix it right now, when we add additional items to the test, isn't going to unfix it. So we want to make sure that we're doing this really well and not haphazardly. So we want to study every single different type of school and make sure that there's not disproportionate impact depending on the student population you serve, unless you're not serving that population well. So we're looking at that.
Mr. Lamb, I'm sorry, to go back, and I may have missed it, but did we have a discussion at all on the ACT word keys, consideration for it being counted or not counted on the next step? I may have missed that prior to, but I think
we didn't discuss it, but feel free.
Sure, because I heard from the Accountability Commission, the point was raised, which I thought was an excellent point. I've heard a discussion before about work keys counting only for Jumpstart students as part of the recommendation for this accountability system, and also like to reiterate what was presented there, which is that the ACT only count for those TOPS or college pathway students as well.
Thank you. We'll note that. What's next? Anything on growth? What's next for K2? This will be pretty brief. We've seen this slide before, I'm sure. This proposal is what was brought before the Accountability Council last year and was endorsed, I believe, by this group as well as the Accountability Commission as an idea to include a literacy indicator, a growth on literacy indicator, a classroom quality indicator, and an interest and opportunities index. Before finalizing the proposal, we know that we need to do a few things because we don't want to. Thank you.
Friend number 2.
For the record, we didn't coordinate our suit choice. But if it makes me feel and look smarter, I'll do it every time.
I blush to do that, by the way. So we know that before we can really make a proposal around the percentages and the weights, what does the growth measure look like, we need to have the test, and we don't have the test yet. So late August of this year, we are reissuing the RFP to select the vendor. That test will either be administered in a pilot process among opt-in school systems that want to help us make sure that we can do our first secured administration of this type well in the spring of 2023, and then it would be fully statewide fall of 2023. If we get enough people spring of 2023, we'll have some good data to start informing proposals in the future. Additionally, we've heard a lot of feedback around the quality indicator in classrooms, both, yeah, love it, both also like the idea, but don't know that you can do the two indicators at the, you can do two different assessments. And then lastly, people who think it's an input and should not be something that we include in the accountability system. So we've heard all of those things. What we want to do is continue to collect data on this so that we can figure out, are there really strong, good correlations here? And it is something that we want to measure to really differentiate schools that are doing really good work from schools that are doing great work from schools that are doing not great work. There's a learning year going on that folks may have opted into. If you haven't, email accountability@la.gov. We will actually tie into class and NIET's data systems and consume that data back into the CIS system, so you won't have to do double data entry, which could be a benefit for you all. And you'll have tons of support and help as we go through this process. It'll give us good, rich data, and it's an added benefit for your principals if they're already using one of these two instruments. So in short, the proposal is that the study group endorse the inclusion of a K2 literacy screener in our assessment index at a minimum, and continue to study the use of instructional quality alongside the literacy assessment. And once we've got multiple years of really high quality data, make further recommendations through a study group on the progress index and assessment index component, and potentially the classroom quality. Lastly, Numeracy is something that's top of mind. We need to focus on that for our early grades just as much as we're focusing on it for our upper grades. So they want us to develop a numeracy indicator in the future. Any comments on K2? Next steps. There's a stakeholder survey that is live. Last time I looked, we had over 800 respondents. So that's exciting. We hope to get some more. It's on the homepage. Feel free to blast that out to your folks and get them to respond. We've got a lot of good teacher comments. We've got a lot of parent comments and perspectives on how the formula should work. Y'all may have seen this slide during the study group. It's just the process. We're in summer where we're getting the feedback and potentially August Bessie where Bessie will discuss and consider. That concludes my report.
So, Chair, before you ask for a motion, educate me a little bit on this process. Earlier today, and we've had several agenda items, and you asked us to receive, a motion to receive, or a motion to endorse, or this, that, and the other. These are all items that are going from this group to Bessie, is that correct? And is us receiving, what is us receiving the item and us endorsing an item? Obviously, I don't think you could ask us to endorse an item at this time because Thomas has indicated a lot of this is going back to the work group to make some changes before it ever goes to Bessie, correct? So what we would be endorsing is something that we're hearing probably is going to be, maybe there'll be some changes before it gets to Bessie. I guess I'm just trying to understand what our role is in voting on something to receive or accept.
Yes, in general, the goal is to get some feedback. So we start with the receive because you are receiving, you don't know, we need a motion on the floor and you don't know how you feel about it until it's being received. But ultimately, we would like to get some definite feedback on what needs to be changed. If you endorse it, and endorse is a newly used term, we used to either say we recommend that Bessie approve this, or we recommend that Bessie not approve this with the following recommendations. This endorsement idea kind of came out of when you were not necessarily provided direct policy revisions and maybe a concept, and you would endorse something in concept because you didn't really know what the strike through and underline was going to look like. So, yes, the goal is to get some sort of feedback. It ends up being a receive. If you don't feel comfortable endorsing what you've been presented, then or making some sort of recommendation, we leave it at receive, unless you do something otherwise.
I don't think I can make a recommendation that we endorse it with all the changes that we and Kennedy wants to make to it. I don't think anybody would go along with that. Receiving it does what, as far as moving forward, just acknowledges that we listened to it?
It just acknowledge that you did get a presentation, and it's captured what that presentation was in our system. I mean, as far as your with the hard copy that you were presenting.
I hope I'm right in just assuming that with all the conversations last week, all the conversations leading up, some of the comments today, there would be another work group that will be before the August meeting that hopefully some changes are made in.
That's right.
Okay.
I was expecting to receive, so
Thank
you want to hurt my feelings.
No, I just wanted to clarify because I was just.
But if you receive it, it's good to say what you don't like about it, you know, like
We don't have that much time.
the board is, you know,
No, I wasn't saying that. I just know there was a lot of different comments made. It'd be hard to encompass all that in one particular motion.
Right, but what I'm saying is if a Bessie member wasn't here, they're not going to know the areas of your concern. And like you said, there's lots of different things that you might have, that you want to make recommendations for, but pick something, you know, just say, I don't like the fact that we're getting the zero for or, you know, take note to the zero being awarded for this or that, you know what I'm saying? Like, make some specific notes for the board members to be aware that you did have concerns. Otherwise, they're not going to know.
And there may be a substitute motion as well. So
Mr. Chairman, we have a motion to receive the agenda item. I'd like to make a substitute motion. I move that the Superintendent's Advisory Council recommend to Bessie not to approve the study group's accountability proposal and give more time to develop a complete and comprehensive accountability proposal.
We have a substitute motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Do we have a comment? Hearing no comment. Those in favor?
Can you restate the motion?
Can you restate the motion, Mr. Jones?
So you're asking us to recommend that we
Never lose suit.
Yeah,
You listen real good to yourself, okay? You listen real good this time. I make a substitute motion that the Superintendent's Advisory Council recommend to Bessie not to approve the study group's accountability proposal and give more time to develop a complete and comprehensive accountability proposal.
Should we have a second by Dr. Henry? Oh, Ms. Trustler? Any public comment?
I have one, I just want to make sure I understood the motion clearly. The motion on the table is to not support the work group's recommendation, but you don't know what the work group's recommendation is. I just want to make sure that I understand that correctly.
As it's been presented, I guess is what you could say.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Jones.
We're operating on the premise of the 5 recommendations that were at the end of the presentation from the May study group meeting. If I'm not mistaken, the date of that meeting was May 25th.
So basically what I'm hearing then is that the motion is that the group does not support a recommendation coming out of the work group as presented in this handout. Is that the right interpretation?
Yes, sir. That's how we interpret it as well, Mr.
That is correct. I don't want to subvert Robert's rules of order, but if there is a proposal that is approved, it's one that would have to come back and we would have to have a discussion in reference to.
Any additional comment from the council or the?
Yeah, I just thought we were receiving this report and that's it. So we heard it, all of our objections were noted, so I guess I was on the same note. but
Well, they're not
Marcia-
noted in the record unless you make a motion to note that in
I
the
got you.
record. And so what he's saying is that he's recommending that the board not approve it as presented today. The proposal as presented today, is what I think you're saying.
And as Ms. Davis has said, the purpose of the Superintendent's Advisory Council is to give input to Bessie. And that's what the motion, the substitute motion speaks to.
So we have a motion and a second.
Can you reread the motion as restated?
We better read the motion and state it.
Who was the second?
Mr. Trustler.
Motion of Superintendent Sheldon, seconded by Mr. Trosclair. The Superintendent's Advisory Council recommends that Bessie not approve the accountability study group proposal and give more time, as presented in the SAC meeting, and give more time to develop a more intensive plan, comprehensive plan.
More complete and comprehensive accountability proposal.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have 2 items remaining just for the group. I know the cafeteria is closing at 1:30. I know the group want to move forward and continue through. I think we're great, but if you want to continue forward and we break as needed, we'll just finish it, okay? So,
Figured that.
I figured, but I just wanted to put it out there. All right, we're at item 3.6, consideration of revisions of bulletin regarding legislative acts of the 2022 regular legislative session. Item A, Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel. Item B, Bulletin 996, Standards for Approval of Teacher and/or Educational Leader Preparation Programs. Do we have a motion to receive?
I move.
Motion by Mr. Villiers. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Lots of seconds.
We have a second by Mr. Reed.
And I want to note that you do not have any handouts because I don't think that policy's been finalized yet. So this will definitely remain a receipt for you all unless you have some specifics to recommend.
Dr. Chessa?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. So this next, I believe this next portion of today's meeting is equally as high on everyone's radar when it comes to our teacher recruitment and retention. As accountability, I think it's all of you are coming here today knowing that you're starting school, probably most of you next week or the week after that, and you all are doing a lot of hard work in your school systems, and your teams are engaging in a lot of hard work in making sure that you have staff filling your schools. And we understand that this is something that has been a problem for a while, but has certainly really been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we do have some proposed policy changes today around certification and teacher preparation programs that we want to bring to you all. So during the 2022 legislative session, there were several key pieces of legislation that address teacher preparation and certification requirements. The first piece of legislation was one that was provided by Representative Mincy, and it revises the requirements for entry into a teacher preparation program and for initial certification. We know that this was a recommendation from the Teacher Recruitment, Recovery, and Retention Task Force that is really facilitated by the Board of Regents, but that we are really strong partners with. The second piece of legislation where these policy shifts come from was presented by Senator Peacock this past legislative session. And so this addressed several items related to teacher certification. It also addresses options to address the workforce shortage, and that includes some out-of-state reciprocity requirements for certification, and it creates some additional pathways for entry into the classroom for candidates who hold a graduate degree in a subject area being taught in the classroom. The temporary employment permit, or TEP option, for certification is the option expanded upon by this legislation and now the subsequent policy that will allow candidates with graduate degrees aligned to classroom subject areas to teach in Louisiana classrooms where no certified teacher can be found. So this legislation really comes from some exploration and some research conducted by that Recruitment and Retention Task Force. And this is really an effort to align some of these policy shifts and BESI policy with this legislation from past session. And so you'll see the first of which would occur in Bulletin 996, which is the bulletin for our educator preparation programs. We'd also see some changes to Bulletin 746, our certification bulletin. Revisions to Bulletin 996 include the removal of the requirement of a core academic assessment, which we all know as Praxis 1 core, or that ACT, SAT requirement for entry into a teacher preparation program. And I'm sure many of us know individuals who maybe have not been able to enter into teacher preparation programs because of that Praxis score or ACT, SAT requirement. So this removal is aimed at really just tearing down a barrier for entry into the teacher profession. Bulletin 746 revisions include updating one of the required exams for educator licensure. So this change shifts the assessment for basic skills from the Praxis 1 core exam to the ACT or SAT exam. The required score for licensure would be the English College Readiness Score, which Louisiana has identified as an appropriate measure of English proficiency for teachers. The Praxis 1 core reading exam would still be allowed as a substitute for the ACT or SAT English College Readiness Score for any candidate who chooses to use that as a substitute. Other revisions to Bulletin 746 include outlining the other options for certification related to the TEP for educators holding graduate degrees, and options regarding out-of-state reciprocity for educators holding certification and having that teaching experience already out of state. And so you all can imagine that this has really been, I'll call it a careful balance beam that we are walking here between making sure that we are trying to work for policy changes that remove barriers while still ensuring quality educators in our classroom serving our students. And so this has included a lot of engagement with stakeholders. That Recruitment and Retention Task Force has been an important part of this. The legislature and our BESI members really talking about what does that balance look like between making sure we have high quality educators serving our students, but we're also removing barriers because we all know in current light of the situation, we need teachers. Everyone needs teachers. So in creating these proposed revisions to BESI policy, we've included a variety of requirements to ensure that our students continue to receive high quality education. Safeguards include these things listed on this slide, ensuring teacher quality prior to initial teacher licensure, like successfully completing and passing a residency year, mastering content and pedagogy as evidenced by passage of the Praxis 2 content assessment and the principles of learning and teaching exams, and receiving mentoring by a certified mentor teacher. And then of course, we all know once licensed and in the field, that additional safeguard is being evaluated via our COMPASS system to maintain licensure. In aligning with recent legislative actions, the proposed policy revisions are instrumental in an overall strategy to try to address our teacher shortages across the state. Removing that exam required for entrance into teacher prep programs is removing one of the barriers into our profession. By utilizing the ACT-SAT English College Readiness Score for licensure, candidates previously excluded from the profession will now have an entry point. And the options offered through the TEP for graduate degree candidates holding degrees in classroom subjects will offer entry into the profession for professionals from other industries who wish to teach Louisiana students. Updating the out-of-state reciprocity requirements will allow for easier mobility for educators in military families or those coming from other states to serve the students of Louisiana. And we know that these changes allow for access to the profession while still maintaining an expectation for our educators. This next slide just overviews what it looks like moving forward. What does this policy look like practically? Praxis 1 Core is no longer required for entry into a teacher preparation program at this point. There was a waiver approved by BESI. President Garvey signed a waiver of BESI policy so teacher preparation providers can enroll and schedule candidates into courses for the fall semester without that Praxis Core requirement in place. So that is currently in place and will be part of the August policy changes as well for long term. The ACT-SAT English College Readiness Score will be used as the English proficiency exam for licensure. Of course, still required for licensure will also be the Praxis 2 and the pedagogy exams. That's important to note because I do think there's some amount of misunderstanding out in the field and with stakeholders. People may be thinking that there is no more Praxis at all when Praxis 2 is staying, and we know that principles of learning and teaching is still in place, as required for licensure. Teacher candidates who have completed a teacher preparation program but who failed to pass the necessary exams will be afforded an opportunity to prove effectiveness in the classroom. And candidates with graduate degrees in classroom subjects will be afforded this same opportunity. Out-of-state candidates qualifying for Louisiana exam exclusion will no longer be required to teach in Louisiana for 1 year, proving effectiveness prior to obtaining a standard professional level license. Once Louisiana has received evidence of at least 3 years of effective out-of-state teaching, a standard license would then be issued.
Can I ask a question before we just go?
Yes.
The second bullet, ACT English College Readiness School will be required for initial they can do either the practice one reading, or is that an 18 or a 19?
18.
Or an 18 on the English part of ACT
Yes.
for certification?
Yes.
And then this master's degree is, that has to be a master's degree in the content area they're teaching, or any master's?
In the content area they're teaching.
What about if it's elementary?
So if it's elementary, we still have to dig into that portion of it. That was a question that was raised to us. That's why we don't have the policy in front of you today, is because we're still working through some of those questions. The law was kind of silent and kind of open to interpretation on that one, so we're still working through that answer. So we can provide that to you, Ms. Voce.
So that'll be before the August?
Before the, yes, because we will be bringing policy in August.
So that does conclude this update about an overview of revisions in response to those legislative changes that we saw this past legislative session regarding certification.
Any comments from the council or questions? Hearing no comments or questions, we have a motion to receive and second. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.7, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators regarding the installation and operations of cameras in certain special education classrooms. Do I have a motion to receive?
Motion.
A motion by Mr. Alexander and a second by Mr. Donovan. Okay, Chancellor, Dr. Chancellor.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins. So we have, our last item today is again one that comes as a result of legislative session. And we know the past 2 years, we've really had a lot of conversation around the state about special education classrooms, having cameras in those classrooms. And so this past legislative session, there was a new law that was signed and put on the books. And so today we have Ethan Lawson, Executive Director of Governmental Affairs, who will walk us through this new legislation and then the impact on BESI policy that we will see upcoming in a few weeks.
Thank you, Dr. Chasson. So I started off with y'all, so I'll send you to lunch also. One last item today, right? So as Dr. Chasson mentioned, in 2021, during the regular legislative session, Act 456 created the outline and policy process for installing cameras in self-contained classrooms for special education students. That law was not funded at the time. It was subject to appropriation. So when there was no appropriation, we did not put this into BESI policy at the time until we had identified funds. During the 2022 legislative session, Act 588 clarified some information pertaining to the policies. It essentially put a deadline for systems to have policies on the books around putting these cameras into the classrooms. At the same time, in Act 167, the legislature appropriated $8 million to us, to the department, to be able to allocate out to the local systems for the installation of cameras in the classroom. It stipulates that it is only for the purchase and installation of the cameras, not the ongoing operation of the cameras. So the policies that we're putting, are the policy that's before you is actually going to be the law placed into the policy. We have not added anything to it. Everything that's gone in there is exactly what the two acts have said, including the portion about using the $8 million for installation, purchase and installation. What I also wanted to talk to you about was the allocation, how that's going to work, or how we're thinking that's going to work. So the $8 million was sent down with literally just the stipulation of what it was to be used for and only. So the department is going to put before Bessie in August a plan for allocation, that way we can get the money out to you as quickly as possible. We have used data to determine the population of special education students in self-contained classrooms in each of your districts, and then we have divided that number to come up with a number for approximately how many self-contained classrooms that you have. We took the median cost that it is to put a camera into a classroom from other states that we've seen, and so we will be allocating the funding through that. So you're gonna have per classroom that we've come up to that number for, that's gonna be doled out to you. We're gonna put it into your accounts as a payment to you, and it'll be restricted obviously for just the purposes that are in here. And then you'll be able to, as requests come up, it will just stay in your accounts. We'll be able to purchase the cameras and install the cameras. And I left this one pretty quickly so we could get questions, because I'm sure there are some questions around this. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Is that self-contained classrooms only?
Self-contained.
Not resource, just self-contained?
Self-contained classrooms only.
Do you know that per classroom allotment number off the top of your head?
So we divided it by 5, so there would be 5 students in the classroom. You mean cameras in the classroom, or the way we allocate?
Yeah, I just know what we
Okay,
pay
yeah,
for a camera.
it's 1.
It's what?
It's 1 camera per.
No, dollar amount.
Oh, dollar, okay, gotcha. Yeah, sorry about that. I was on multiple wavelengths.
$1.
$1, no.
We're gonna reject this one, Clay, we're not gonna accept
So-
it.
We got it.
When we looked across the states, it ranged from Texas having about $7,000 per classroom all the way to another state having about $1,500. So what we did was we took the median of that, and it's gonna be around $3,000 to $4,000 per classroom.
Gotcha, thanks.
No problem. Sorry about that.
Can that money be used also for us, because we end up with storage issues or data issues for that? How long, those kind of things?
So it can be used, as the law says, for installation. So installation, we interpret as meaning the purchasing of the system and the privacy background software that goes into storing that. But it cannot be used for the ongoing maintenance or payments for the camera system.
Does law require how long you have to keep the tape before you report over it?
The law does stipulate that in the original law. It says how long you have to keep it, and then also put stipulations on who can view it and when they can view it.
And
Now, and all that would be
by the
upon-
parent, right?
It's by request of a parent, yes. And all that is in the policy that we're going to put in front of you.
And once we receive the allocation, is there a deadline as to when it needs to be installed?
And that's the reason why we're doing the allocation to the systems, because if the department were to keep it and do it on a reimbursement rate, we would have to give the money back to the legislature at the end of the year. By putting it into your account with those restricted funds, you can hold on to it until you deplete those funds. Because we know that parents will request this, and that's how you put it into the classroom. So we don't know when you'll get a request from parents. So we want to make sure that you have the money. Now, once the money is depleted, until the legislature gives us another allotment of money, we won't have it.
So again, how do you know how many self-contained? Do we report that to you? Or how-
So we don't have a report of the self-contained classrooms. What we did was we took each system's number, the SPED population, through some data that we received that are in the classroom. I think it's less than 40% of the time. I'm looking at stats.
That's correct.
Yeah, less than 40% of the time, and then we divided that number by 5, because we're assuming that there would be 5 students in these self-contained classrooms, which is a number that's below the norm, usually. And so it's going to be between $3,000 and $4,000 per one of those classrooms.
So you developed your own formula to determine how many self-contained classrooms?
Yes, yes.
So if you have a combination self-contained resource, you're still looking at the number of...
It would still be the number of students, I would assume.
So we're not really sure this is a fully funded initiative.
It's funded for the installation of cameras, which is what the law is provided for, not the operation. And so the legislature gave us $8 million to make sure that everyone has it, and so that's where going through the process of putting the law into policy and then allocating the funds that the legislature has given us.
So I knew this was coming, and I had my Director of Special Education actually go through and tell me how many self-contained classrooms I actually have in my district. What if that doesn't match with what y'all have come up with?
So we have done it based off of the information that we have and collected through data, similar to how we allocate funds for the MFP. We're going off the previous year's data to be able to collect that. If you even have one SPED student who is in a classroom, who needs to be in a self-contained classroom, you are getting the amount for like one classroom. If that doesn't align, like I said, we did err on the side of caution when we're coming up with that price. You will actually probably have more money than it actually costs to put a camera in that classroom. So there would be some extra wiggle room. Now, the thing is, once the money is done, we get to a situation where we're not reserving any money as a department to reallocate. That's gonna be in your pockets or in your bank accounts. So when we come back at the end and the legislature checks, the legislature would be the one to put more money in for the acquisition of the cameras.
So in concept, we're supposed to reserve the money until we run out. Could be 5 years if nobody requests.
That is
So
correct.
take your allocation, put it aside.
It will be restricted, and this is
and
all
use
it
it
could be
until
used
it
for.
runs out.
That is my understanding from our fiscal office. More easier than the legislature, thank you.
I was asked by HR person and a lot of people, and SPED person, what happens if you have a parent that requests a camera? And you have another parent that's in that class says, I do not want my child on camera. So what do you do then?
And that is a question for legal counsel. Like I said, I am putting in what the law has stipulated. That question has been raised at the legislature when this was going through. My understanding is that the other students, because it is the way that you request to see the tape is all other people will be blurred, is what I'm told. So that was the original discussion, and that was in 2021, things have changed since then. But that's just what I understand of it, but that would be a question probably for your legal counsel.
Blur, that's gonna cost money too. Blur.
Installation of cameras, keep going back to that. That's what the legislature said in this document, so.
Are there any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm not. Do we have a motion to receive?
You have that.
We have a motion and a second to receive. For those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you again. All right, we have a motion to adjourn.
You'll need one.
I am so used to saying that one.
September
September.
22nd.